to switch off mobile phones and those in public gallery, that they may interfere with the sound recording system, and that the meeting will be on camera.
Got this machine going.
If there are any relevant financial or other interests, I would remind members of their obligation to declare them.
Oh, right, great, thank
I
you.
also remind members to ensure all tablet devices have their volume off,
Have to move
function and F8. The following members' apologies are
We have none we've been notified of, Chair, as yet.
okay. Good. With the draft minutes of the meeting of the 26th of March, and they're in the table papers.
Chair, we just had a bit of an electronic quirk happen. It picked up a different set of draft or of minutes. So it's the one in the tabled pack is the last meeting, not the one in the big pack.
I think I chaired it.
So the beauty of the electronic system, it does quirky things.
Okay.
So that's the ones we're looking at in the hard copy table pack.
Hard to beat the hard copy.
Would members agree that the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Brings us then to chairperson's business, and the clerk's memo then at page 10. There are a number of BBC press releases on Windsor Park and Casement Park, which are at pages 12 to 15. And we also have correspondence from the Moorland and Owen Vara Residents Association, which are at page 16. Now, as members will be aware from recent media reports, there have been a number of issues surrounding the redevelopments of Windsor Park and Casement Park. A structural engineer's report is expected shortly, which will provide details of the recent subsidence at the West Stand at Windsor Park. The department established a safety technical group, STG, to ensure that any proposed redevelopment of Casement Park adhered to all the safety regulations, and it would appear that this group raised concerns in relation to the emergency evacuations procedures. The GAA, with approval from the department, submitted a planning application and appointed a contractor without designs being approved or supported by the Safety Technical Group. Members should note that the membership of this group includes representatives from Ulster GAA, Sport NI, Emergency Services and Belfast City Council. So that there are two issues there before us this morning, one in regard to Windsor and one in regard to Casement. Okay, David.
Thanks, Chair. And obviously, when some of the news broke on the BBC about some of the issues before, it was more in relation to Casement. I think it was Good Friday, the Easter holidays, and I think they were probably lucky that it did fall on a sort of such a news day. Absolutely very worrying, considering some of the presentations we have had here in the past and some of the questions that have been asked around Casement in particular. And I know, coming from my own background, of what people go through to manage small crowds of 500 to 1,000 people, that you would see such a project, of horse and cart being driven through legislation, to be honest. And questions about how we move forward in Casement and a determination to try and make the thing happen. Nobody ever referred to any of these matters at any stage, and it is quite worrying, it's quite serious. And I think we do need, as a committee, to have a plan moving forward whereby we need to investigate how this has all come about, because it goes beyond this committee as well. But there's planning issues in there that got through certain levels of planning without these simplistic questions being asked.
Ben? William and then.
That's all right, yeah.
The thing that I agree entirely with David, if we go back to, I think it was the December meeting of this committee, which was in DCAL, we were given assurances by departmental officials that they were actually very confident that the court case that was going to flow in the not too distant future after that was going to be won. What the worrying thing for me is that having established a safety technical group, when we read here in the briefing that we have on page 14, that neither the design team nor members of the STG are aware of the stadium with any existing arrangements. It seems to me, to be quite honest, that there's no joined upness around this issue. I am concerned that everybody's supposed to be on board around it, but there is what will happen at Windsor Park, or potentially could have happened at Windsor Park. And we wait to see, and I know we're coming to that as well, but health and safety at stadia is a huge issue. And one of the things that I've picked up is the length of time it would take, for example, for people to be evacuated from the stadium should there be a fire, God forbid, similar to something that happened around Bradford. And I know that was an old stand and wooden structure and all of that. But if there was subsidence in the way that there looks to have been at Windsor Park, for example, how on earth could people be evacuated in time? And it is evacuating people onto the pitch. Something which health and safety officials would be agreeing to at this stage, in this day and age. So I think that, there are more questions than answers around this issue. And not least is, really, is it realistic for 38,000 people to be put into the stadium if the infrastructure isn't there to support them not just being accessed, but quickly egressed in an emergency?
Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks, Chair. I think I would support the comments already made. I think we're all awaiting details and further information on, I think, that on both issues. On the Windsor Park issue, from what I've seen through the media, I think there is a real concern as to why the excavation work took place in close proximity to the stand, to the existing stand. It could well be the cause of the subsidence. If that is the case, I think we have a lot of questions that need answered into how this happened. Such a project has to have consultants involved and professional engineers, otherwise you cannot proceed. And it's their decisions and their advice that the work proceeded on. So we need answers as to why the building, the stadium, was put at risk, and we need clear accountability in relation to that, and I think it's important that we get that. I know there is an investigation underway, but those are serious issues, and the point has been well made. We could have had a very serious incident at Windsor during that football match when if that stand would have collapsed. And at this stage, the indications are that it has resulted from recent excavation work, which DCAL are involved in, the council are involved in, and we have been briefed on quite recently, and we're not made aware of such issues. So those questions remain to be answered. In relation to Casement Park, again, we were briefed on it very recently, after our recent concerns that we raised within the Assembly. Some of us raised, and also within this chamber, or within this committee. And we've had a briefing from DCAL, and the serious issue of the safety technical group being ignored is one that needs to be fully investigated. We have the interests of the residents that we've talked about. They have to be taken on board fully, and obviously the interests of the GAA, but they must be in that order. Safety first, the residents, and then the GAA. And people seem to be taking shortcuts, and that is not acceptable in relation to a public accountability and expenditure of money and health and safety of everyone involved, the local residents, those playing the sports, and the spectators. We're here to ensure that there's accountability, and I think we need questions answered, Mr. Chairman, on both issues.
Oliver, did you indicate it? No, okay.
Chairman, can I just, in Windsor,
Yes.
over to my understanding is that the movement in the stand at Windsor Park actually took place on the Tuesday following the game, not actually during the game, but obviously they wouldn't have been aware of that because there were temporary marquees put up immediately abutting the stand, and so people wouldn't have been able to see that until they were taken away anyway. But I think we obviously can't comment much on that until the report that we're awaiting is revealed. I do think, however, one of the things that we do need to, because I know I've had people who have been contacting my office or contacting me through Facebook and so on. And indeed, it affects me, I have to be honest, in declaring interest as someone who is a block booker at Windsor Parks and Internationals. We do need, and I just seen a statement from the IFA yesterday saying that they're hoping that Windsor can be used for the international. It's a crunch game, and I do think that a decision on that, and I do hope it can be used, and I hope that the stand can be salvaged. But I have to say, I understand that even since the initial movement in the stand, there has been further subsidence, so it does not look good. And I've spoken to people privately who are involved, and the indication I get is the stand is not salvageable. And and I think, apart from anything else, if there has been further movement, there will be a question of confidence for spectators, I think, as well. But it is absolutely vital that the work that's ongoing at Windsor, if we are going to play that match in June at Windsor, is completed. But it should not be completed in a rush job, and therefore serious consideration has to be given, and I'm sure it is, and I hope it is, to the match being relocated to a brand new stadium with all the facilities purpose built, and that obviously is the Kingspan Stadium at Ravenhill. That's not a decision for us, but I do think, as Mr Dunn has said, the safety of those spectators going to these matches has to be paramount. Where the facilities are the most up-to-date and state-of-the-art, that stadium should be used.
Are there any other questions or comments? And then we'll see what the appropriate action would be in regard to the two issues.
Sorry, Chair, I'm sorry I missed the start of it. Are the officials going to come and tell us exactly what's going on?
Chair.
Are you talking about Windsor or Casement? We're doing.
Well, actually, I've written to DCAL officials twice and had no response. Actually, on both, I just can't get any information from anybody on anything, and I'm just wondering when is anybody going to come and talk to us?
That's right.
There will be at next week's meeting, the Permanent Secretary and the Deputy Secretary will be here on a range of other issues. So there may be an opportunity in that context to.
Could I ask if we put it specifically on the agenda to talk to them about this issue?
Yeah, I'm just taking questions or issues that want, and then we'll come to what we want to do. And if you bind it in with that, if you're happy enough, that'd be great. Right, no other questions. Right, we'll take the two issues then one at a time. The first one there, the Windsor Park one, is a simpler one to deal with because it's not a long story or complex story. Are there particular actions you want to take at the moment then in regard to the difficulties with the Windsor Stadium?
Chair, it's my understanding that they're still awaiting the technical report from the structural engineers. The deadline for that, certainly as reported in the media, has increased considerably, and I think part of the issue has been, as Mr Humphrey had indicated, there's continuing movement. The stand itself has continued to move. Therefore, I'm assuming that will have an impact on what they're saying and when they're saying it, because if it continues to move, then they can't draw any final conclusions.
I just say, Chair, that I don't want to find out the information through the Belfast Telegraph. I want the officials here now to tell us exactly what they know, up to date with whatever. I don't care if it's an interim technical report or whatever.
Okay, just do you want to?
Chair, we could bring in the IFA if members are talking in terms of an additional meeting, if they want to do that.
I would certainly propose that. I want a specific meeting to talk about this. This is a catastrophe.
What I would suggest, Chair, is then we potentially look at Monday or Tuesday of next week. Tuesday is usually a better day to get a room. So if we aim for Tuesday lunchtime
There
next
are
week.
some people who are in the debt maybe in the morning.
You could do it in the afternoon.
Okay. We'll look at room availability on that.
Now, you run into the issue then of oral questions between 2 and 3:30, which will affect some people here.
And the debate on sickness as well, Chair, is on that day.
Could we not do it during the lunch break?
Yeah.
I should
Well,
lift it.
that's what we'll aim for. That's
Okay.
what we'll aim for. That's usually the best time.
Okay, well,
The key thing for me about Windsor is whatever way it goes, this stand, that Cop stand, I don't think can be used for that match.
Yeah.
Looking at the latest video from the IFA, I fail to see how they could have seating in place to replace it, because the railway stand that would face the stand that is currently closed would not have the seating capacity to take everyone there, and the other stand is nowhere near completion. So a simple point I'm making is there needs to be clarity. I think there needs to be clarity for the supporters in particular, but there also needs to be clarity for the manager and the team and all of that, you know, so that these things are put to bed and the concentration is on the game and not where the game's going to be played and where the stadium's going to be ready.
And it's the IFA we're bringing to that.
Yes.
Sorry, Chair, as an add-on issue to that in relation to the Irish Cup final, there's also a public story out there at the minute in relation to maybe 3,000 to 4,000 people who would normally attend on that day not being able to get to that final due to the situation at Windsor. Understand the oval was picked and the Keenspan hasn't even been mentioned in that context. Could we get some indication as to how they decided in relation to the oval as a venue, because again it impacts on the public out there?
Okay, that on the agenda as well for Tuesday.
Can we also find out the practical difficulties of hosting it at Kingspan, either event? As I understood, there are certain caveats that were given to the public about the number of matches that could be played that were non-rugby, and that there's some technical issues that might prevent it. I don't know what they are, but I'd just like to know what they are.
No, we can check with the rugby.
Just to be clear, what impediments are there, if any, to hosting the matches at Kingspan?
Just a point that Mr McRae just made, and I'm obviously not aware of the legalities around any such arrangement, but I do have to say, from a Northern Ireland PLC point of view, if it was the case that our national football stadium can't be used for the reasons we've discussed already this morning, that a stadium which the taxpayer has funded across the city cannot be used because of a clause, I think that will be a hugely embarrassing situation for Northern Ireland in the sporting fraternity in general, and for governance in Northern Ireland, I have to say.
Just to be clear on Mr Humphrey's point, and I'm sure he's supportive in this, it might have been caveats that were arranged with the residents around so there weren't too many pop concerts and things like that, but I suspect it might be a technical issue that was meant for something else. Mr Humphreys is absolutely right that this is a matter that in extremis we have to go and do something. So if we could find out, and I'm not sure, Chair, what's the best way of doing it, whether it is a response to correspondence or whether we ask people here to talk about it, but it is important.
Tuesday's that thing about sorry, just sporting and I work. Well, I'll be there from 9:30 to 12:30. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's fine. Brings us on then to the situation with Casement. I think we've covered everything we need to in regard to Windsor. The Casement one is certainly much more complex in that it's very difficult to get to the bottom of who knew what and who told who what and who took what decision in the light of what information. It is a bit of a complex story. How do members wish to deal with that in regard to getting clarity, which is the first thing? Any particular?
Chair, we already have firm secretary and the deputy secretary coming next week's meeting on other issues, but this can be made the priority issue if members are content with that approach. My understanding of the report that's being done on the judicial review, it will actually look at a number of the issues around why the planning approval was ultimately overturned, which will deal with issues around safety evacuation and so on. Now, that report, I understand, hasn't been completed, but this would at least allow decal officials to talk about what they understand, what they know, and allow the committee to ask questions about the safety technical group and why that information wasn't necessarily then included in the planning going forward. So if members are content, we'll reprioritise the briefing next week from the Permanent Secretary and the Deputy Secretary to focus more on casement. If there's sufficient time, it can deal with the other issue, but obviously this is, members have already indicated this is a priority because of health and safety issues specifically. David as well.
Oh, sorry, David, yes, go ahead.
Chair, that's good for next week if that's possible, but can we, are we empowered to be able to speak directly to someone from the sort of the safety technical group end of it and actually get it from the horse's mouth rather than...
Chair, with the papers we have at the minute, those names have all been redacted. Now, a number of them are Sport NI. I can't honestly say any reason, Chair, why the committee can't contact Sport NI to find out who those people are and start talking to them. I can't see a particular issue with that.
we need to speak to the experts.
Well,
People have come to this
Yeah,
table
yeah.
and sold us a pup.
We have all those papers that were...
they were supplied by the Residents Association, Chair, so
with all
again,
the
they...
redactions, but we're assuming
they
they're
have
genuine
redactions
and
as well.
an accurate reflection of the... Yeah, and the details deleted there or redacted. It is very... There are meetings between DCAL and Sport NI and Safety Technical Group. You get other meetings with other people at them. It's a very complex sequence of meetings and so on. Do you think there that the Permanent Secretary and the Deputy Secretary and the STG are the key people that we need to speak to, or is there anyone else we should be?
What about the project manager from, sits under DCAL, Chair?
Rory?
That members will remember initially with Stadia Development there's been a variety of people taking that forward, and they have been and gone and moved on it. Currently, the official that has been presenting as lead to the committee has been Rory Muskelly. But in terms of the Safety Technical Group, that is specific people with specific knowledge. And I think they're probably the ones that are best placed to understand the workings of that group and why it makes.
I would still support Rory Muskelly coming back
Yeah.
to talk to us as the project manager.
The heads up, he's sorry.
And because I will say, support. I suspect when we get the permanent sec, whatever, it'll be a defensive
Correct.
manoeuvre by all of them, just to
Well, the
say.
difficulty again is it's a new Permanent Secretary who's only just arrived in the department,
But they will respond,
Rory,
Chair.
well,
will respond, Chair. I understand their position. It will be to try and protect the department, but we have a responsibility to try and find out what's going on. And I think we should have.
Simply agree, and I mean, I think the point of having Rory there as well would be useful because
Okay.
he provides continuity.
Okay.
Correct.
I think, Chairman, sorry, didn't do it.
Okay, Alderman, and then, yes, go ahead.
Can I suggest that we send a set of questions to the Permanent Secretary before the meeting, so when he comes to the meeting, he will have a feeling for them of what we want to answer, so there's no excuse. It'll give him time to get answers.
Absolutely. In these circumstances where the Permanent Secretary is coming, they are given a very clear understanding of what the issues are, what the questions are likely to be, what the concerns are that people have. So that would, yes, he'd not be coming here for this without some forward information. Absolutely.
Chair, and also this meeting is on video as well, so they'll be able to review that very closely and check that the questions they've been asked cover everything that members have raised. But that would be our way of approaching them anyway, is to let them know the issues, because otherwise they may not then have the information at their fingertips, and that would be our intention, obviously, that they can. In terms of overarching authority, obviously there's a number of personnel on the Safety Technical Group that are Sport NI, but ultimately the department will have authority because Sport NI is the arm's length body. So the Permanent Secretary and Deputy Secretary should be in a position where they can comment. They certainly can go to the right people to get that information if they don't have it themselves initially.
Sorry, Chair.
William, and then David.
It's just, I also think there needs to be absolute clarity, and Peter mentions there about the STG info not being included as it went forward. One of the things there I think is very concerning is that if you go by reports in the BBC around the issue, that DCAL had been asked over a 13-month period for documentation on the proposed emergency exiting strategy. It didn't provide it. I think that's just absolutely lamentable. I mean, there's no excuse for that at all. especially given that there are 3 stadia projects, one of them which has been completed, I understand, completely now, albeit not on the scale of Casement Park. For 13 months for the department that's funding these projects not to provide that information, when there is a group there, a technical group that's taking these things forward, I think that there's something seriously wrong there, and that was, if I'm right, and I don't know the timescales from the information in front of us, but I'm wondering if that was the situation when DCAL officials were sitting in front of this committee and telling us everything was working well and fine, and for 13 months the information wasn't being provided.
A further point, just the notes of the meetings have redactions because they were given presumably under FOI to the residents. This is a different situation that this Assembly Committee, which is meant to scrutinise the work of the department, and I would assume therefore that we would be able to get copies of the notes of the meetings without the redactions, that we actually know who's at the meetings.
Chair, what we'll do is we'll supply the department with the papers we have. A number of those are minutes of meetings where there are Sport NI officials. I can't see a problem for the committee knowing who's been there. I don't see why that would be a problem. If they're minuted meetings, they should be available for the department or for the committee's scrutiny. But we will obviously let the department have the information we have so that they're fully in the picture, and we'll ask for unredacted, if that is a word, copies.
Okay, are members intent with the...
Sorry, Chair,
Oh, yes, sorry, David, yes.
Sorry to get sidetracked there, we're bringing the project manager and all back in again, which we will do, obviously. But back to where we started off from, the safety technical group, can we get information or further information or a presentation from them? Is there a chair of that group? Can we bring that person, he or she, to the committee? Because that's been a whole silent end of it at the minute. Nobody has listened to so far.
Chair, once we find out who that person is, because as we've said, the redactions mean we don't know who
Or
it is.
a representation, a group representation that covers a number of emergency and statutory
There's been a
bodies.
request there for presentation or opportunity to question the technical group.
'Cause that's where the real information is.
Yeah. If anybody's going to know, they'll know. Sure. Okay. The other element, or the other stakeholder in all this, was the GA. Does anybody wish to take any questions to them, or this stage, or do we hold that until later? Okay.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure, entirely depends on the makeup of this grouping. We've been told that it has GA, Sport NI, PSNI, and other input. And you know, I think one of the issues here is the capacity issue, particularly the entry and egress from Casement, which very much was a traffic issue as far as I understand. So I think we need to get an overview of. And if there is ideally, if there is a chair, then I don't know if there's any need to be getting everybody in the room, you know.
Yeah.
But ideally, if there is a chair or even the lead body, if it is the GA, or
There's bound to be some arrangement whereby somebody has oversight of that, or takes a lead role in the safety technical group.
Yeah.
Just following on David's point in relation to that, Chairman, in terms of people appearing and whatever, when you look at the makeup of that safety technical group, Sport NI funded by the taxpayer, police funded by the taxpayer, fire and ambulance funded by the taxpayer, city council funded by the ratepayer, there's absolutely no, these are all public bodies. They're all answerable to government or local government. There's no question these people can go and hide. They have to be brought in front of this committee and questions have to be asked and answered.
Yeah.
We will pursue.
Okay. Thank you.
Just Chairman, the letter from the residents group, are we considering that, or are we just...
That's the information really that we have and that we've discussed in terms of...
They have written to us. Can we at least
acknowledge it?
We've already let them know that it would be dealt with.
and give them some indication of what?
Chair, if members agree, we write back to the Residents Association just to let them know that they knew it would be discussed at the committee meeting today, and it'll allow them to have then feedback of the action that the committee's taking forward.
Should we not actually hear from them?
I think it might be good to hear from them.
I think we should hear
If we
from
do
them.
it in a sequence, if you're happy enough that we take the permanent secretary, the deputy secretary, the Rory, the STG, who else was it? That's all. We get those done first, and then move on to
It allows them to know what we know.
Yeah, but I think we should say to them that we would like to hear from them. And
That's fine.
if we can take it in the order that you think, that would be fair enough.
Yes.
But there's two residence groups, so, you know, that's going to, if you're going to be inviting, you'll have to pick.
Sure, we have heard from Mora, the Moorland, Anno and Vara residence group.
Yes.
They're the ones we've only ever heard from. They wrote to us
Yeah.
previously.
There's
And maybe talk to you about the other group.
There's a more recently constituted group, so it's the Andersonstown Regeneration Committee, I think.
I saw there was a report in the Irish News about it.
Yeah, it's.
The only thing I noticed though was they hadn't actually appointed officers at that stage. They'd had a public meeting.
They'll have officers.
Since then. At the time of the newspaper report, they hadn't.
Yeah, no, they have actually done that,
Yeah.
yeah.
We make contact with them then as well.
Okay.
Cahill as well.
Oh, yes,
Well, it's
Cathal.
the same sort, same.
Right, okay. Thank you.
We make contact with both.
Just under Chairman's business, committee is to meet on Thursday the 7th of May, which, as you'll be aware, is the date of the Westminster election. Some committees have agreed not to meet on this day as it's expected that quorum may prove difficult, so I presume that we will be following that practice.
Chair,
Agreed.
members are agreed?
Great.
Okay.
Most members will be aware also that this is Malcolm Collins' last meeting. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank him for his time with us and wish him all the best in the future. And also welcome Sabra Ray to the meeting, who will be available to support the committee on meeting days. Presumably that's
Sabra.
yes, down there. Welcome, and the best wishes there to Malcolm. The next item on the agenda then is the briefing from the Arts Council regarding their savings delivery plans. And could I refer members to the clerk's memo, which is at page 50, the Arts Council briefing paper, which is page 54, and the Arts Council savings delivery plans for 15-16, which is at page 60. And remind members that the committee agreed to request briefings from DCAL and arm's length bodies on their savings delivery plans. Additionally, the committee agreed to seek a briefing on the activities regarding Creative Europe from the Arts Council's European Engagement Officer, and the department has provided funding for this desk officer post. So we're going to get an opening statement now from Maureen McKinney and Lorraine Madole from the Arts Council, the Director of Arts Development and the Director of Operations, and also from Shauna McNeely, the European Engagement Officer. So Noreen, Lorraine and Shauna, you're very welcome to the committee this morning. If you'd like to make your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. We hope that the briefing paper that we sent in advance was comprehensive in terms of the Arts Council's savings delivery plans. And as you'll have noted, we have to find 224,000 from our salaries and admin costs, and then 1.154 of our grant programme, which is primarily our annual funding programme, Chairman. You'd also asked us about our rationale for our funding decisions, and we've set out for you the published criteria which was used this year, which is slightly different given the difficult year that we were in from previous years. And again, I hope that that was clear. What we thought, Chairman, and we know that you want to ask questions across three areas this morning, is that we would use the opportunity to allow our colleague Shauna McNeely to give you a little more detail on the Creative Europe desk in the first instance, and then we would take questions if you were happy to proceed on that basis, unless you would like us to say anything further about the savings delivery or the rationale for funding.
Could you maybe just say a bit about the rationale? One of the comments that a number of arts practitioners was that they were questioning the rationale and the logic of the decisions.
Yes.
So maybe if you said a little bit about the rationale, that would be helpful.
Yes, absolutely, Chairman. Well, I mean, we knew that we'd be facing into a very difficult year, of course, and all the signals were thus. We held a number of workshops with organisations, trying to signal that to them very strongly that we would indeed be facing a very difficult funding round. And indeed, as you probably recall, we also had an in-year cut, which was difficult to manage and I think brought a lot of concern to the sector as well. However, as you know, we did run an advocacy campaign trying to raise the profile and the importance of the arts, and we were very pleased with that. We did that hand in glove with the arts sector, and I think that resulted in something like 23,000 submissions to the public consultation on the draft executive budget. Needless to say, the Arts Council and the sector were very disappointed that didn't yield any difference in terms of the final budget outcome, and we indeed were subjected to 11.2% cut within DCAL. So we had to implement that, Chairman, and we did a lot of careful planning, looking at the criteria for funding. Our normal criteria, which has been set for the last several years, has been artistic excellence, public benefit and quality of management and governance. And then this year we introduced, as you would see in the paper, what we called our balancing criteria, where we brought into play a broader range of criteria which underpins the Arts Council's 5-year strategy. And in particular, we were looking at making excellent art accessible to all, delivering benefits to our community and building partnerships. But given the circumstances that we were facing, we also had to look at trying to retain a balance of provision within each art form and indeed across Northern Ireland. And so we looked at the range of art forms. That's always an important balance. We looked at geographic spread. That's vitally important, and I know is of concern to this committee. That included organisations who, both provide work within their local base, but also have the potential to tour and bring that work further afield, as well as organisations that are based right across Northern Ireland, outside Belfast and Derry primarily. We also have to have a range of size and types of organisations, and as you know, Arts Council funding, executive funding, supports organisations from the scale of the Ulster Orchestra right down to very small community-based, more grassroots organisations. We also had to look very closely at any duplication of service or any perceived duplication of service, where we simply maybe could not afford to have 2 or 3 of one type of arts provision, and we gave that very careful consideration. And of course, as always, we take into consideration risk. We went through various steps in terms of our moderation. First step is organisations meet the 3 criteria, the 3 eligibility criteria. And if they do and they achieve a medium across each, so they must have 3 mediums to proceed to the next stage, and that's where the balancing criteria kicked in, where we had to look more strategically at the arts infrastructure and how we were going to sustain key elements, so that in future, with the hope that funding will improve, although that may not be for some time, that we have a core there to build up again from. And as I say, those balancing criteria, geographic spread, etc. That was a very difficult process, because very likely if we hadn't had our funding cut by 1.34 million, we would have continued to support all of the organisations that we had previously supported. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that, and so the decisions that we had to take were very finely balanced, and I can't stress that too much. We really had to take a very hard look at if an organisation wasn't doing as much regional touring, maybe we had to deprioritise that. If an organisation wasn't presenting a year-round programme exclusively, there may be a better fit for them under project funding so that we could begin to affect the savings that we needed to make on this Exchequer programme. And also, you may have noticed from the press coverage and from our decisions, a new approach to supporting literature, which again, we're having to look at more organisations moving into project funding, because we simply can't retain all 115 organisations with all of their overheads and their programming costs to the level that we could. That's self-evident with a cut off the programme of £1 million. We're also trying to look very closely and work with organisations where there might be mergers or other efficiency savings that can be affected. That'll be a longer term process, and we're trying to set up a fund which Lorraine will be looking at to help organisations where they can make that transition into a new way of working, possibly with shared resources, shared overheads, ideas of hubs, centralised hubs, because we realise that things indeed are probably set to be worse next year, and the organisations that feel that they've been very badly affected this year won't be alone when we come to next year. The organisations that have been cut, I think there are 27 organisations who've had a cut in funding. And again, without going into any individual cases, because as you'll appreciate, a number of the organisations are going into our review process, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to share the detail of their application and why we felt they maybe weren't as strong on one aspect as opposed to another. But it's been a very difficult year. We've also looked at strategically perhaps who can best, if I can put it that way, sustain a cut. So we looked very hard at the venues, because at least they have the capacity to raise money through box office. They have that capacity. No one wants to have to increase their ticket prices or indeed to reduce their programme, but they at least do have that capacity. Other organisations like art galleries, for example, which tend to be free, and that's a principle I think that we all adhere to, more difficult, and programmes that are providing free services to community groups don't have that capacity. So I think you could say that the venues have been quite hard hit. As I said, publishing also, looking at moving them to project funding. And theatre, I think, would come out in terms of percentage cuts to portfolios as having sustained a fairly significant cut. And I know there's been quite a bit of representation on that front, Chairman. However, they're not alone when we look at the percentage cuts across the board to particular art forms. We have a large number of independent theatre companies, and again that is one area where we'll be very keen to talk to the sector, and indeed probably to the festival sector as well, areas where there could be synergies for more collaborative working. That is a process that we now have to start to engage in with those sectors and those organisations. You'll have noted 6 organisations were removed completely, and again we're talking to each of those organisations about other sources of funding, because you'll be aware that our annual funding programme is but one, and there are a number of other funding streams, from small grants to lottery project funding, where we would hope to be able to sustain them. But the difficulty for them is it'll be a new model of working, because we can't cover all of their overheads any longer. and we want to help them through that transition. It'll be a difficult transition, and they will need support. The venues, you will have noted really the MAC, the Lyric, the Grand Opera House and the Playhouse. Indeed, the Millennium Forum in Londonderry also sustained a fairly significant cut. The other area that we looked at very closely were umbrella organisations, Arts and Business and Audiences Northern Ireland. Both sustained 20% cuts, and again, that's detailed discussions about what their core remit and how they can downsize but still deliver a very effective service for the arts sector. And that they have been very, we've had productive conversations with them already about that. And that will be new service level agreements with organisations, of course. And the other organisation that has been hit very badly has been the Nerve Centre, which of course runs the Culture NI website. And sadly, we had to take the decision that in the current climate, we could no longer support a cultural website, given the priorities to try and keep arts organisations who are delivering product, who are delivering the plays, who are delivering the arts in the front line. We had to protect first. So that's been unfortunate, and again, there's been quite a groundswell of and a lobby of support on behalf of Culture NI. So we just end, Chairman, by saying that had we not been cut, we wouldn't have been passing on cuts at this scale to the organisations, and we would have hoped to have continued to fund them, probably at a comparable level. There are always some weaknesses that can be addressed, and there are also, you know, sometimes changes in programming, but I think that is the broad picture and the broad context. And just to add, as I noted, we did write out to organisations to advise them of their governance responsibilities, and in particular the responsibilities towards staff, because we had to say bluntly, we can't guarantee that there will be funding next year. When we wrote to them in October. And then Rain held 2 workshops with all of the sector to take them through the new balancing criteria and our whole approach to the funding round this year.
I just want to ask there, just picking up on that point, you mentioned workshops earlier on, and then I assume those are the workshops
Yes.
that you were referring to. What was the uptake like at those? And
Of the 115 clients that we had in the annual funding programme, there were 100 turned up to those 2 workshops.
quite an incentive to turn up, I
It
suppose.
was
in the
quite an incentive
circumstances.
to find out what, get the inroads to it, you know. So no, it was a very positive, and as Noreen said, the message was very clearly there. This is a tough financial environment that we're in. There's no guarantee that anybody's going to get funded after the 1st of April, so be aware of your governance as well. But I think one of the other messages that we said, and we did say it in the guidance notes for the programme as well, sorry, excuse me, I have a cold, so was that we weren't going to salami slice our clients. We wanted to take a strategic view of who was best delivering against our 5-year plan. And as such, we didn't ask clients to apply for a cut. We asked them to apply for what was reasonable. So to deliver a good, ambitious programme, and some did. And you will see from the list, obviously, that some people did get an uplift in their grant because they were delivering very specifically against our strategic view. So we didn't want to salami slice because that would detrimentally affect even more clients who could potentially have closed down clients if we just salami sliced them.
Also, could you give us some update on, I understand there's a review of premises for the Arts Council.
Yes,
How is that?
Well, the Arts Council is in leased premises at the moment, and that lease, there's a break point in the lease next March, March 16. So we are required to do options appraisal to see whether we should stay in the building or not. And we're currently in the middle of that process, working with DCAL and with SIB to find the best option for the Arts Council moving forward.
Chair, is that a private ownership, could we ask?
It is, it's private landlord, yes.
Just to add, it's I think we could say it's inevitable that the Arts Council will be moving.
Yeah.
Right.
And that will affect further savings as we move forward. But not immediate, because we're just not sure when. Well, we know when the lease will break, but there could be an earlier break in the lease, so we may be moving sooner rather than later.
You're looking for a townhouse, Leslie?
Very nice, yeah.
The other point just was, you mentioned there were a large number of independent theatre companies. And I was at the event in the MAC the other night, and there were other theatre companies I'd never heard of. Well, one in particular I'd never heard of. I think I know most of them, but there's one I hadn't. And how many are there in Northern Ireland? A ballpark figure.
20?
Well, there's about 20. Under the annual funding programme, I think there's about 11. We fund 11 independent companies, plus then the Lyric and an umbrella organisation, which is the Ulster Association of Youth Drama, which is merging with NITA.
Yes.
But beyond that, we fund quite a number of them through project funding as well. So there's around 20 or just over 20 small independent theatre companies.
That's actually higher than I thought. I thought it was maybe just about a dozen. Stretching it, but I mean, if you had a comparable region in the GB, and you think in population terms, we're only 1.8 million people, you wouldn't surely, if you take a city like Birmingham or Manchester and you scale it up, you're talking about a huge number of theatre companies. Are we above the average? Or
No, I wouldn't say so, Chairman.
that's the general pattern across the UK?
If we maybe looked at a region like Wales, which we would compare to in terms of scale, etc.
Yes.
That wouldn't be disproportionate. I think the balance is indeed in the south of Ireland there are probably more.
Right.
And part of the tension, I think particularly in drama, is there are a number that are on the annual funding programme, and so they have their anchor overheads and their programming and their staffing and their administration, whereas I suppose if I could call them younger companies, which are always coming out because we've got the very good drama course at Queen's. So every year we have ambitious, talented young actors coming out wanting to form their own companies, but they're doing it in a different way. They're doing it more on a project-by-project basis, where they're not getting locked in because the funds simply aren't there, into office premises, core administration, and I think that's some of the tension that we need to try and unpick, and indeed look at where some of the larger anchor organisations like the Lyric and the MAC can provide some of that service for the very small up and coming organisations. And again, I think this idea of creative hubs and shared workspace, because everybody needs a level of administration, of course they do, and a level of marketing, etc. I think that's something that we will really have to look at in more detail.
Okay. I must apologise, before starting questions, should have actually taken, I think, maybe Shauna's presentation as well.
Yeah.
We do that, and then have a number of folk with their names down there for questions.
Okay. So, I'd like to
Shauna,
hand over
please.
to Shauna.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, for inviting me here today to provide an overview on Creative Europe. The Creative Europe Desk UK, established in 2014 in April, sees the Arts Council of Northern Ireland join a network of 10 staff based across 5 cities in the UK, in a partnership which is led by the British Film Institute and the British Council. This partnership is supported by DCMS and the European Commission. My role as the EU Engagement Officer began in mid-November 2014. The main objective of the role is to promote Creative Europe to the creative sector with an aim to increase the amount of creative funding coming to Northern Ireland. Creative Europe, which will run until 2020 with a Euro-wide funding pot of €1.46 billion, is the only EU funding strand focused entirely on cultural, creative and audiovisual sectors. The fund operates 2 schemes. One is the media sub-programme, which has been created to support the audiovisual sector, namely film, television and video games, and the cultural sub-programme to support the creative, cultural and heritage sectors, including, but not limited to, visual arts, theatre, opera, circus, literature, music, dance, fashion, heritage, design, architecture and interdisciplinary projects, as well as support for publishers of literary translation. In terms of priorities, Creative Europe is a UK-friendly programme dealing with audiences, skills and the creative economy. The €1.46 billion allocation of funding is a 9% increase of previous funding levels. It is allocated across the media programme, which has €823 million available up until 2020, the culture sub-programme, which has €455 million available, and the cross-sectoral strand, which has an allocation of €184 million. Creative Europe's predecessors were Culture, which ran from 2007 till 2013, the Media programme, which has been running since 1991, and the Media Mundus programme, which ran from 2011 to 2013. In order to provide some context of previous Northern Ireland successes in securing EU culture funding during the previous 7-year programme, there were 8 Northern Ireland beneficiary organisations that collectively attracted a total of €1.6 million of culture funding to the province, while just over €274,000 was awarded to 4 Northern Ireland media companies during the same period. Creative Europe is still a relatively new programme, with only 2 calls being published to date for culture projects. However, September 2014 saw the results of the new programme, and I am happy to confirm that 2 Northern Ireland organisations received support as partners within the 21 awards made to large cooperation projects, which were selected from 74 applications. In the same programme, there were 337 applications to the small cooperation projects, of which they allocated money to 37 programmes. One of them was the Arts Council of Northern Ireland as a partner in Corners, which is a €2.5 million project, which received 50% support of their total budget, or €1.28 million from the Culture sub-programme. The Arts Council of Northern Ireland's total Corners budget is €208,000, with €123,000 own funding and £85,000 from the Creative Europe programme. Corners is a platform for artisan audiences. The objective is to enable exchange across geographical, political and economic divisions. More than 50 artists and researchers and 30 organisations are part of Corners, involving 11 partners from 9 countries who are jointly leading the project, which will run until 2018. The lead partner of the project is Intercult in Sweden, and the other countries involved are Poland, Slovenia, United Kingdom, Kosovo, Spain, Italy, Croatia and Serbia. The University of Ulster also received 50% support in 2014 for their large cooperation project called Ceramics and its Dimensions. This €3.9 million project, which will run until November 2018, brings together museums, universities and companies to investigate the cultural, academic and industrial elements of ceramics. 16 partners are involved from Czech Republic, Estonia, Finland, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Serbia, Slovenia, Spain and the UK. Of the Northern Ireland applications made to the cooperation project's deadline, which was in October 2014, 2 organisations have been successful. The Nerve Centre has been awarded 52.44%, which equates to €200,000 of support towards Future Artist Maker Labs, which will harness the creative power of 3 leading Fab Labs in Derry, Londonderry, Limerick University and Ultra Lab in Madrid. The project will culminate in a show at the Media Lab Prado in Madrid in 2016. The Nerve Centre is the lead partner of this partnership. Forest na Gaeilge has been awarded 31.3% of their project budget, which equates to €200,000, to their project called Other Words Literary Circuit for Small and Minority Languages. The project lead is in Spain, with project partners from Slovenia, Sweden and Macedonia. So in the last round, which was the October 2014 deadline, across Europe 476 applications were submitted to the Small Cooperations Project category. A total of €11.9 million was awarded across 64 projects, resulting in a success rate of 13.45%. Of the 127 applications submitted to the Large Cooperation Projects category, A total of €23.4 million was awarded across 16 projects, resulting in a success rate of 12.6%. So within the last round, a total of just over €35 million has been awarded to small and large cooperation projects across the EU in this most recent call, with Northern Ireland having 2 projects within that. With regards to the success of UK projects, since we're part of the Creative Europe Desk UK in this most recent funding round, UK organisations are involved in just over 50% of all funded projects, which is 41 out of the 80 successful applicants. Just under €6.5 million has been awarded for UK-led projects, which is more than previous results. The overall success rate for UK-led applications was 24%, almost twice the Europe-wide average. 8 organisations were awarded funding as lead partners within small cooperation projects, while a further 18 organisations were involved in successful applications as associated partners. 3 UK organisations were awarded funding as lead partners within large cooperation projects, while a further 10 organisations were involved in successful applications as associated partners. Results are outstanding for a number of further media and cultural deadlines, and we should learn the outcomes of all of these applications by September 2015. With the annual deadline for cooperation projects taking place in October 2015, at this point I am aware of at least 12 organisations that are in the process of developing partnerships in order to make applications to the programme. There are also 7 identified audiovisual organisations that are planning on submitting applications to the media programme this year with the forthcoming deadlines. Creative Europe Desk UK, Northern Ireland, will continue to work to promote Creative Europe to the creative sector and support future applicants. So thank you for offering me the opportunity to brief you this morning on Creative Europe, and I'm happy to take any further questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Shauna. Gordon, first of all.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much, ladies, for coming in this morning. In relation to savings, then, how many staff do you have at present?
Within the Creative Europe Desk, Northern Ireland?
No, just within the organisation, yeah. How many staff? Can we clarify the...
Yeah. It's equivalent 46 FTEs at the moment.
Yeah, full-time?
Yeah.
With part-time?
Yeah. Well, it's probably about 55 staff altogether, but it's the equivalent of 46 FTEs.
Right, okay. Grand, thank you. So the savings, quite significant savings obviously made through the grants. In relation to the salaries, could you clarify how you've made those savings?
Well, to date, the salary savings have been made through not replacing staff who leave, and also we're looking at things like flexible retirement, etc., which staff have asked for. So there are those types of savings. Obviously, going forward, there is the civil service voluntary exit scheme, but we're not sure whether we're part of that at the moment, and we're in negotiation with DCAL of whether we can be part of that. If not, it would be expected that we would have our own exit scheme, but we're in the process of developing that because we don't have one at the moment. We have asked staff for expressions of interest, and we have done that, so we're moving forward on that basis.
So there's been no staff, there's been no loss of posts as such, has there?
Not at this point, no.
No persons, yeah. Okay, admin then, how did you make your savings in admin?
Well, the admin, I think as we said in the briefing paper, we're looking at all of our internal corporate services type costs, which are about staff travel, board and staff training, those things that can be cut. Premises was actually the next biggest after salaries, as we've said, that we will be moving probably before the end of this financial year, so there will be a saving there. But it is difficult as well with an organisation which is a development organisation which needs to meet the public to cut back and say your staff can't go out and meet, so we have to be very careful what the balance is there. But we're looking at all of our internal lines and trying to cut back on those.
Okay.
Just to give you an example of that, our communications budget is going from 75, which was very small, down to 50. And, similar savings across those categories that Ben has mentioned.
Okay. Just a couple of other issues then. On the grants, 115 applications received, 81 were maintained. 81 got their grant, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. How did you justify then uplifting some of these grants while others were declined? I know that there is criteria there, I appreciate that, it's all listed, but, you know, just generally, was that not a difficult issue to deal with? Giving people extra funding when others were getting nothing?
We had stated all along that, as Lorraine said, we invited organisations to apply not for an 11% cut or not for standstill, but to apply to us for what they considered their real costs going forward for their development needs, etc. Because we very much need to have that benchmark to see what the sector, sometimes we will agree with that, and sometimes we'll say, well, actually, that's a bit much, or, but that analysis is very important. So we didn't penalise applicants at entry point, and Council also said that two things were important: to continue development where there was excellence and clear developmental needs. And I would put Northern Ireland Opera into that category. Very young, dynamic company. When you look at the figure, you might think that that's a large grant, but in terms of opera on these islands, that would be by far the smallest allocation through any arts council for opera provision. They've been doing superb work. In 3 years, they have really risen to an international standard, and we need to be able to continue to invest in excellence at that level, and Council did make that clear. They also said, and you will note from the allocation, there's been a range of smaller uplifts where we were able to mainstream, for example, the OYA Annual Music Prize. Rather than make them apply separately for that, that's an important initiative, so we were able to build that into their grant. That's important. Also important that the annual list doesn't remain too static, because there are always those new organisations coming along, and we had engaged with DCAL and with East Belfast Partnership on the development of a cultural and art strategy for the east of the city. We got a very good application in for 3 festivals, and again it's part of the role of the Arts Council to be able to support new initiatives, especially where there's identified under-provision. So we have to balance that, and the organisations that were cut, that was a very difficult decision, of course. We're trying to look at other streams of funding for them, where they've been cut completely. But however, some of the organisations who've had a reduction in funding, we will be talking to them again about new models of working. And what we've had to do is clearly identify with them, unfortunately, we can no longer afford to fund that aspect of your work, but we do want to continue to invest in this aspect. And so those are the flexible decisions that we need to be able to take as an Arts Council in a context where we can't simply keep everybody on standstill funding.
That's grand, thank you. Obviously it's a difficult decision, some very difficult decisions to make, so well done, and thanks, Chair.
Rosie McCurry.
Margaret Carley, and thanks very much for the presentation. Can I just ask you, whenever you were making your decisions about how to make your cuts, how much consideration did you give to most deprived communities?
Well, I mean, that is part of when we look at where people are delivering. You look at geographic spread, and that is one issue. But you do look, and people are asked to identify the areas that they work in. So it became part of the balancing criteria of their spread and reach and the amount of public benefit. So you do look at where they're delivering work, and that is a specific question they're asked to tell us.
But would you be concerned that there will be a disproportionate impact on deprived communities, given that they're the hardest to reach? I know there have been difficulties, and the Arts Council has been working to try and reach out. But are you concerned that might be an impact?
No, we're not, because again, if we look at this is one funding programme, and when we look at the totality of our funding through all of our programmes and the spread across Northern Ireland, and again, even within this programme, we don't think there will be a disproportionate impact, because, as Lorraine says, that's something that we do look at very carefully. In fact, organisations who We asked them all to address more robustly this year their outreach programmes, because that is a key priority, and it's a key priority for DCAL also. Access, participation and engagement, especially with more deprived communities. And I have to say the organisations rose very well to that challenge. So we don't feel with the organisations that we're still continuing to fund who do excellent work in that arena. The 6 who have lost their funding, yes, again, we hope they'll be able to pick up that work through another mechanism, through another funding programme. But when you look at the totality of our lottery funding and our small grants, there's a lot of excellent work going on in the most deprived communities. And I think when we re-examine our overall stats, we'd still be hitting that 60% of our overall grants hitting the
top 20% of deprived areas.
Okay. And in relation to the 6 organisations that have lost out, would they be representative of deprived communities, or?
Everyone does an element of education and outreach, of course, and work in harder to reach communities. However, not every organisation can do that to the same extent. To be honest, it's more difficult for publishers. However, what publishers do is they deposit in all the libraries across Northern Ireland, which are open, free and accessible. So in a way, quality literature is getting into our libraries where people can access that. Then they've also been making great strides, Guildhall Press and Derry, of course, doing very locally based work and telling those local stories, which is important. But it's a little more difficult. They will do readings and they will do workshops in particular communities, but their core business is publishing books. So not every organisation can do it to the same extent, nor would we expect them to. But still, again, with the totality of our funding, that is a key priority, and Arts Council funding has been directed to those communities at 60%.
Okay. Can I just ask you to tell me a wee bit more about when you were talking about, you know, possibilities for projects to look at collaborative approaches and synergies? Can you flesh that out a wee bit, what that might entail?
Well, I mean, the issue, what we have done is set aside an amount of money in the incoming year, and we will open a programme for people to apply to look at different ways of working together. I mean, as Noreen has mentioned, some of the things she said, you have, as we said, 11 drama companies or whatever it is. They all have the same type of back office services. That's one thing to look at. They all have administrators. They all have HR people. You know, is there a way that you could create a one set of backstage people, and then everybody else is the artistic side in front of it? So it's looking at that. It's looking at ways that people could collaborate on delivering specific projects. I mean, if you look at our 2 SLAs, like Arts and Business and Audiences NRI, is there something that they could do together that would save costs and efficiency savings and things on that side?
Have they expressed openness to that idea?
Yes. Yes, they have.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And the programme that we will devise, which we will be opening soon, will give people both the capacity if they need to do some research and business planning around models, which would be essential, and then actually helping them with some of the setup costs when they get to that stage. You know, so if it's not necessarily a new company, but a new hub that can service a number of independent companies, those are the sorts of models that we're very keen to look at, and that we're working with SIB on. We've been doing an analysis of the sector for us and the pattern of funding, and how we can perhaps move forward when funds are so overstretched.
It'd be a shame, like, for projects to go under if there's other ways, maybe.
Absolutely.
Working together.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Cathal Hoshin. Vice Chair. Just in terms of access to European funding, and particularly to the Creative Europe budget, which is very, very exciting indeed, is there a perception out there, is it real that we're punching under our weight in terms of European funding, particularly in the arts?
I think the number of applications over the past programme would indicate that one of the things that we could do better is to create partnerships and work collaboratively and hopefully, generate further applications. Within the previous programme from 2007 to 2013, I think I had given the overall figure of the projects that received funding over the 7 years, and that actually was just 8 organisations. And when you consider the number of cultural organisations in Northern Ireland, I think that we could probably try to develop applications to Creative Europe, and that's what the desk is there to do, is to promote that.
So 1.4 million.
1.46 billion euro is available.
1.4 billion pot.
Yes.
Significant. Just in terms of, I know Rosie asked about the socio-economic spread of cuts, but I was just going to say, how necessarily would you access the geographical spread? I'm just looking at the organisations that were hit, such as the MAC, the Lyric, and the Grand Opera here in Belfast, but also then you also mentioned the Millennium, the Playhouse, to a lesser extent the Nerve Centre, and also Guildhall Press, which all have been hit. So, just is there a proportionality there, given the sort of demographics?
Again, we came back to, they weren't all cut to the same extent.
I appreciate that.
And obviously, the Grand Opera House has taken a significant, both a cut, they actually applied for less, which I think was commendable, given, that they probably are our most potentially commercial arts venue in the city, and it's got a very mixed programme of, West End shows, etc. So they can and do have to charge bigger ticket prices when they're transporting those shows over, of course, with all of the additional costs. So they had applied for less, and we also applied a cut on top of that. But on paper it looks like 100,000. In fact, the cut from us was 22,000, and as I said, they applied for less. The MAC and the Lyric both 50,000, and we are confident it's a challenge for them. But we are confident that with their level of programming, they're both relatively new, although of course both have a previous history, but really beginning to develop their audience profile, the type of programming. And I think the new artistic director at the Lyric is really raising the game there. There have been some tremendous shows in the past season with packed out audiences. I think the Pillowman, which is currently on, which is superb, has done extremely well. So it's a balance between the quality of the programming, getting the balance right with the audience taste and likes and quality, and also carefully determining your ticket pricing. And that is quite a scientific exercise, and sometimes it takes a little experimentation. And the Lyric have learnt a lot over the past 3 years with what works and what doesn't work. But we are confident that they can make that difference up. And indeed, in Derry also with the Millennium Forum.
I know that they're running Mamma Mia, I think, now shortly, which is a huge West End hit.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But they need those hugely popular shows that will bring people in, and then hopefully that will help to subsidise the more artistic programme.
Sure. Just finally, the current headquarters is a very major piece of prime real estate. How much in real terms would you save by actually moving elsewhere from the?
How
much
much
could you save potentially?
How much? Gosh.
We don't actually know yet. I mean, the issue is SIB are looking at options where we might go, and we don't know.
No, I appreciate that.
We, at this point, we don't. There will be a saving, we believe, but at this point, until we know what the premises actually are, we have no idea.
Is there any downside to that move?
No, not in savings terms, because it will be, I think we can say confidently, it will be cheaper than Malone Road. Likely to be more city centre, and likely to be in a shared resource, although with SIB they'll be looking at a number of options for us. they've measured up all of our business needs, as you would expect, the square metres per number of staff, and all of the Office 2010 equations that that are used for head counts in organisations and other needs. But we are expecting to be in a shared resource, which we hope will bring further savings on top of a rental save.
I suppose one of the points there is just people are coming to the Arts Council from all over Northern Ireland. A large number would be driving down. One of the issues there is the ease of parking where you are, whereas there can be an issue sometimes if you've got a very city centre location.
Indeed.
But if they were looking at premises which would be in cheaper area of less, maybe not quite as slippery as the Malone Road, there might be savings in that regard. So I just do you know if they're taking in mind that issue about access for members of the public going in?
It's been a very important part of our discussions with SIB is that we are a public-facing organisation and we need to make provision, and part of, as you say, the reason it's very handy, although we're on the Malone Road, there's bus, there's car parking, there's all of that, but we do feel that need, and also our clients use our spaces. They may come for meetings with us, but they also use our rooms for their own meetings. And we're trying to build that into the SIB discussions, but it is more or less you have X staff and you get 11 square metres each, and that's how it is.
I think we may lose that argument, Chairman.
Yeah, I think we've lost the argument.
We think we may lose that argument on car parking and shared facilities for arts organisations.
Okay. Cameron McKellar.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Thanks very much for coming to the presentation this morning. I was a wee bit shocked about the website when we heard that it was going to be gone, do you know what I mean? I just want to know how much was saved to yourselves and taking away that facility that really was just beginning to grow in my eyes.
The Culture NI website, yeah. The cost of the Culture NI website was, from our grant, 100,000, yes. Now, we continue to still support the Nerve Centre at 50, and that's for their core music programme, which is hugely important, of course. The wonderful work that they've been doing with young people and access to music, facilities, workshops, training, and that's a core element that we want to hold on to. And again, all we can say is, had we not been facing the cuts, yes, having a cultural website for Northern Ireland is valuable, of course it is. And it's an excellent resource for listings, review, etc. It's dynamic. It's all of those things. But again, as we say, when we're trying to keep the presenting venues and indeed the independent arts organisations who are making the work to tour and to go into those venues, it just became unsustainable. And as we say, Arts and Business and Audiences NI also cut, and indeed Voluntary Arts Ireland, again as an umbrella organisation, has taken a fairly substantial cut as well.
Just with the changes in society, where a lot of social media and stuff was used to be able to, I suppose, freely for advertising, and that was shown greatly in your 13p for the arts campaign, where a lot of Facebook and all of that, and people signed up to it that way to show people are using computers and using stuff for different ways. And when you lose a website like that for what's a small figure of £100,000 and a larger budget, it's hard to swallow, along with a lot of the cuts to the arts. But I suppose out of the 115 people who could have come to your workshop, or the groups that could have come to your workshop, 15 didn't turn up. Are they included in the 27 that faced reduced redundancies, or no?
No, they didn't get a cut because they didn't go. Some of them may well be in that, but no, it's not a consequence. No.
When they didn't turn up to workshops, how did you inform them then of?
Well, they would have had discussions with their officers anyway. Okay. I mean, the officers would have noted who didn't turn up and had those conversations and explained all the issues to them, certainly.
Oh, that was okay.
So it wasn't that they weren't contacted at all.
Okay, no problem. And just some of the stuff already has been covered. Just there was the drama course at the Queen's University was mentioned earlier and the accents in it. Is there a risk to any of the courses at Queen's, given the headlines during the week about the cuts from Dell?
We would expect so, of course, and like everything else, arts and humanities unfortunately tend to suffer. So, you know, we would be very concerned indeed, but we don't know the dispensation of the new Vice-Chancellor. And, you know, they'll obviously be going into, they haven't announced yet which courses, but obviously they will be going into those discussions. And it's like everything else, I suppose. It's how many people are applying for which courses, and those are going to be the priority courses. And yes, I would fear humanities as a trend, and arts have been going down.
Yeah, just two more questions, Chair, if you allow me that. Just with the new councils coming into play now, do you see any risks there where the groups that maybe have reduced funding, or even those that have in fact maintained their funding, because new council have come in and their decisions haven't been taken, maybe with joint funding or match funding through local government? Do you see any risks there in any projects?
Potentially, yes. But again, the community planning process is...
Sorry, I can't hear you.
In terms of the community planning process, we've tried to be actively involved with a number. At the minute, we just can't cover all 11 super councils, and they're all at different stages of developing their plans. But we've been actively involved with Derry, Londonderry, and I was very heartened to see that they have arts and culture as a central pillar in their 8 themes for development moving forward. So, not surprisingly, I think with the City of Culture and their experience and the impact of that year and the change that it made to the city, they very much want to continue to support. I don't know if I can say the word invest, because it'll all come down to money, of course, at the end of the day. But very much that is a central pillar, along with all of the other areas, economic development, etc., that education, that they'll be taking forward. So I find that heartening. I think Belfast have a good track record in terms of the arts. I can't see that being diluted. And certainly we will be, working with them to see. Again, we've just run 2 very successful programmes with Belfast and Derry, the Derry Legacy Fund and the Creative and Cultural Belfast Fund. And that has been a mechanism to enable organisations to do more ambitious, high-impact projects that normally there wouldn't be the resourcing to do. And we're hoping to look at a continuation programme.
Yeah, we're going to be trying to looking at how we can engage with the other 9 new councils to say, can we do something similar with you? How can we join with you in promoting the arts and trying to ensure the sustainability of some of those organisations that may be there?
Okay, thank you. Just final question then to Shauna. Just with the WIC Euro and within the European fund and all that coming about, and the projects have been costed and within their application, do you see anything put at risk? Well, out of the 2, I suppose, that were funded.
The way it works is
that couldn't have been predicted when they were putting up.
Yeah, the way it works is that the euro exchange rate that is used throughout the lifetime of the project is the euro rate that was in place the day that the call was published. So that remains throughout the lifetime of a project, which can be up to 4 years.
Okay, didn't realise.
So it shouldn't have any direct effect on.
Okay, didn't realise that. That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. William?
Thanks, Chair. Morning, ladies, and thanks for your presentation. I'm sorry I missed the very start of it. Can I just point out that Shankill Road Mission is for sale? Whenever you're looking to move premises, and it's an excellent building.
I predicted you would mention the Woodfield Road, but you've actually stretched it before Shankill.
We'll tell SIB.
Can I would you contact Presbyterian Church House? Declaring that this is a member of the Presbyterian Church. Could I just say that I welcome what you've said about in response to Ms McKevitt in relation to the local councils. I think that's very important, because I appreciate the difficulties that you're under, but they, now having larger budgets, have greater scope for working in areas like the arts and follow the example that Belfast has so clearly set for all the others. And I would commend Belfast City Council as well for the work they've done in this area. In terms of the voluntary exit scheme that you mentioned, Rian, is that because arm's length body staff are public servants rather than civil servants. Is that you're waiting on clarification around that issue? Okay. Can I ask in terms of the lottery funding? Some of your money is distributed that comes to you from the lottery. Is there scope for more to be done in relation to lottery funding? Because I know a lot of it was taken away because of the Olympics being held in London and the infrastructure around of that. Is there more scope there?
Well, the lottery money has now got to a point where it's pretty static moving forward. It's just sitting at over 10 million a year, which is almost matching our exchequer funds at this point because they have dropped so much. Those funds are actually pretty much at the limit at the moment, and in terms we've had to cut back even on some of our small programmes within lottery. But the fund that we were talking about, the Sustainability Capacity Building Fund over the next year, it will be funded from lottery resources because actually we got a little bit back from the Olympics last year, and so we're going to use that money to try and help the organisations moving forward.
Is this because the lottery sales are static? Is that?
Yeah, it's done on the forecast for the next 4 years. The sales are pretty static. Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask then, in terms of the cuts that have been made, have they been made, equitably across the cultures across Northern Ireland?
Yes. We believe, we've gone, and as Noreen has expressed, on public benefit and artistic quality, and we believe that there's an equitable treatment of all the clients across the debts. Now, obviously, there was an Irish language organisation that you may feel that was cut, and we have particularly an Irish language organisation and an Ulster Scots organisation in our last year's annual funding, and one of those has obviously been removed. But that was specifically because they didn't meet the targets for the last 2 years that were set for them. Okay. And that's the reason it's been in the public domain.
It was nothing to do with finance, okay, or budgetary restraints. In terms of going forward, then, does this provide the challenges that you face and the arts world face, both in this city and across Northern Ireland? Does it provide an opportunity as well for more streamlining of the arts, do you think?
We do, absolutely, William. We're confident. We're confident that we can, through some of those interventions that we've been describing in the capacity building programme, that we can help organisations to transition into a different way of working, and that is potentially easier for some sectors than others, where you can see synergies, and that idea of being able to share back office, etc., is really exciting. And we think increasingly more organisations are going to have to move to project funding and work in a leaner way, not in terms of maybe the artistic element, because obviously we don't want to see a dilution in programming and output, but in terms of the administration, and that's where we would be looking very carefully at that balance between core administration and programming. And very often we find ourselves in a position as a key funder. That's our job. But because of particular circumstances in Northern Ireland, we find ourselves having to keep the door open with all the core costs for an organisation. And then they're actually looking to other funders for programming. So other funders will say very clearly, no overheads, projects only. And so if we're not picking up the tab for that, that makes that even more difficult. But we are going to have to contract, and we did tell the sector at the outside this will result in a smaller sector, and as I said, next year the process will have to continue. So there have been shockwaves this year, but we're going to have to spend this year really conditioning organisations and trying to affect that cultural shift into new ways of working.
Finally, Chair, can I ask, returning to Europe and monies, I always think that compared to, for example, the Republic of Ireland, we're a big part players in drawing down money from Europe, not just in this area, but across government. Is there more that the Northern Ireland Bureau in Brussels can do to help you? And have you been working with them before these cuts, or indeed has that work increased since your budgets have been reduced?
We have a very good relationship with the office on a number of fronts, not least it presenting a very good showcase.
A couple of weeks ago.
And indeed over the last 2 years, we've been running a programme with them of reading small-scale performances, so trying to raise the profile of the arts from Northern Ireland. That has been remarkably successful in raising interest. We've also brought over a number of small-scale theatrical productions and put those into other venues in Brussels. But absolutely, they've been very helpful when we bring over any sort of delegation. They put us in contact with key decision makers. They afford us opportunities so that we can put the case. And we've been involved in a number of their Parliament's research and development programmes. They were doing one into interculturalism. Because of the work that we've been doing in interculturalism and the arts, we were invited over to do a paper on that. And indeed, our chairman, Bob Collins, is going over imminently to participate in another roundtable discussion. And also, I think, as Shauna would agree, they're helpful in trying to make connections for partners. One of the biggest challenges for European funding, as Shauna knows, and in fact we know from our own experience in the Corners programme, where we have 9 partners. Now, we've been working together for about 5-6 years, doing projects on a pan-European basis with our artists, sharing ideas, developing new work, making commissions. Our first application to the culture programme was unsuccessful. That took a lot of rethinking, reshaping, development, strengthening our partnerships, and then we were delighted that our second application was successful. But that took 6 years to get there. That's a fantastic programme, and we have 35-40 artists collaborating across all of those countries that Shauna mentioned, really the edges of Europe, bringing work. We're going to have a major showcase in Belfast this autumn of the work that's been commissioned, not only of our artists from here, but their European partners. So that will be a significant offering in October. It's a fantastic programme, but it's taken a very long developmental process.
Yeah, I'm pleased to hear they've been helpful, and that there's a joined-up collaborative approach, and it's good the way the arts have been used in Brussels to promote Northern Ireland PLC. That's good, but have they been helpful practically in terms of delivering you money?
No.
And I think that's the, I welcome all of that work, and that's good, and that's exactly what should happen. But I think, there are people, dare I say, Laura Leonard in the Belfast City Council. If you had a meetings, not telling her how to do your job, but she's the European manager of the European unit at City Hall. Has drawn down hugely significant amounts of money over the years for the city. Helped set up the European unit then in Londonderry and so on. I think there are meetings or conversations with her, but also I do think we need to see more delivery from our European office. Let me put it this way, I don't know the answer to this, and maybe I'm setting myself up for a fall, but I'm sure if we had your equivalent in the Republic of Ireland in front of our equivalent committee, the answer to that question would not have been no.
Yeah, I mean, that's just to clarify, William, that's our experience. We have a joint programme and we jointly fund that. That's small scale. In terms of pull down of European funding through the Brussels office, no, not in my experience.
Okay, thank you very much.
Leslie Crean.
Yeah, my question's 3, Chair, but one of them actually is to do with Europe, because I'm firmly convinced that not enough has been done. The whole structure in Brussels, many times that I've been there, we're always playing catch up, and William mentioned the Irish Republic. I was very impressed by a chap over there who was full-time from the Irish government agriculture, but he actually covered the whole ambit of all money. The big problem is that if you wait until you hear of something, the chances are you're too late. You've got to be in before that. You've got to be in when it's been formed. I was wondering, did you have any direct dealings even with the SEUPB?
I mean, our SEUPB, our connection with them is basically through a funding programme that they help fund for us, which is the re-imaging programme. That's really our only connection with SEUPB here.
No, I think there's more has to be done, and it applies to, again, like you said, William, there, all departments here. The only one that's done really well was DRD, but I wouldn't mention that. But there's money there.
Filling in potholes.
So we've got to get us somewhere.
We wish you would get some for the fixed streetlights then.
Yeah, we'll have to go back. But no, seriously, it's a big issue, and there's a lot of money there, and we're not getting our share of it. And if we wait until something's announced, you're very much in the back foot. You need to be in there helping to form the policy, and there are people there to do that. Unfortunately, our delegation not convinced yet that they were at that speed. Certainly, they were not. But that's going to have to be increasingly more important to all of us here, because we still are a net contributor. On the voluntary exit scheme, Lorraine, you mentioned that you weren't really part of it.
Yeah, well, we don't know if we're be part of the general scheme, but it is a civil service scheme, and we aren't civil service.
Yes, but it's designed to cover arm's length bodies as well. Now, no one I've heard so far has been able to tell me just exactly how it's affecting them.
No.
But if you have to do it on your own, where would you get the money for redundancy payments?
We couldn't fund that. We would be making a business case to the department.
So it really should be joined up. This whole thing should be joined up.
Yes.
And the appreciate us. Arts Council have had a difficult time here, and there are a lot of very unhappy people still. In fact, I had a letter from Equity there the other day. Were they one of the 6?
No, Equity were making representation on behalf of the drama sector, which they felt had been disproportionately affected.
Yeah, that's right.
So they were making a global representation.
Well, who were those 6 then, Noreen?
They were Pobble, the Irish Language Organisation, Blackstaff Press, Guildhall Press, Green Shoot Productions, which is a drama company, and sorry, they're in my paperwork.
Music
here.
Theatre for Youth.
Thank
and
you.
McCracken Cultural Society.
That's right. That's what's
on the screen.
And the final point, just on the web page, is a pity you could have done that in-house. Is that considered?
Yes, I would have to say everything was considered. As you can imagine, when we were facing in and before we knew the full extent of the cuts, and they could have been worse. Obviously, we were looking at rationalisations across the board. Could we have the capacity to bring arts and business possibly, or MB in-house? Some of the other umbrella services, could they be serviced within the Arts Council? And indeed, a web listings page. Now, for many, many years, we did it the old-fashioned way, stuffing envelopes with leaflets and sending those out across Northern Ireland and doing a monthly calendar of what was on. Obviously, of course, technology has moved on. Our problem too is just existing resources with our 46 FTEs and having to reduce that. We wouldn't yet have the capacity to do that. Part of our thinking on that one also was, just to pick up your point, that many of the arts organisations are doing their own e-marketing now, of course, and they're using social media very cleverly and promoting. So even though it doesn't replace the central listing site, where you can go to one point of information for everything, at least there is still some provision there in letting people know what is on. And as I said, the organisations are very good at doing that themselves. That may be something that we'd have to look at under the capacity building programme. But for now, unfortunately, we simply couldn't sustain it.
Because I do believe that's essential.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Basil?
Okay. Do you think society has an obligation to support the arts?
Yes. a one
Do you think that opera deserves a higher per capita subsidy than other forms of cultural expression, like, say, football?
Well, I haven't done the comparators. I don't know if it does, Basil. I couldn't imagine that it does. Certainly not in Northern Ireland.
If you look, though, you said in your presentation about opera, how successful it's come along that. I suspect that there are plenty of people that want to put the argument to you, but why are we spending money on the arts when we could be spending it. And I'm not, you could sit and say about hospital admissions or anything, but let's just keep it within the arts family. People ask about social deprivation and things like that. So how do you make an argument, or what argument are you going to make that says arts deserves funding?
Well, there's been as you'll be aware, a long tradition, post-war tradition of public subsidy for the arts in the UK, and I think that's a very important principle. To use the old adage, not everything that counts can be counted. And of course, we believe that access to arts and culture is a fundamental human right. In Northern Ireland, the subsidy, and it's always invidious to compare, of course, and I'm going to compare now with sport, but we receive similar levels of subsidy through voted funds, and I think voted fund support for things like arts and sport are hugely important. Otherwise, people don't have access at a level that is both affordable and indeed
one of the
sometimes
arguments
free.
you put forward when talking about the Millennium Theatre was that you said that we have to have Mamma Mia because that provides funding so that we can do other higher artistic issues. Why are we trying to push water uphill? If people don't want to go and see it, why are we funding it?
Well, because I think it's important, and people do want to go and see it. However, if we had to charge the ticket prices that we would have to charge without public subsidy, you would take that access away completely. I mean, the Opera House, for example, if there was no public subsidy going into even a more commercial organisation like the Opera House or the Millennium Forum, their ticket prices would soar. So that subsidy is helping them to keep their tickets at an affordable level that aren't London levels, because obviously...
So I want to just run through a few questions, because I do think that these are arguments that you have to make and make repeatedly, because I don't think they've been made yet. But why do we need an Arts Council for Northern Ireland?
Well, not only we, but you would expect us to say this, but I think both the sector and then the ALB review that was conducted by DCAL into the role of all its arm's length bodies, including the Arts Council, I think very clearly demonstrated the need for an independent body that can take decisions on behalf of the sector.
You could have an Arts Council for the United Kingdom.
Well, in the United Kingdom, it's quite a different model. There's, because of the sheer scale, so you have England, Scotland, Wales, as you know, and Northern Ireland. But even in England, given the size of the country, there are a number of regional arts boards, which really, if you looked at our scale, we are more like a regional arts board. We have the name of an arts council.
But if your purpose is just to do the fair administration of grants against agreed published criteria, which you have, you don't need to have one in the Malone Road or Belfast. You can just have one in Manchester.
Well, we would say the essential role that the Arts Council performs as well is we bring highly specialist knowledge on the art forms. So we're not like career civil servants in that we bring a specialism within each art form area, and I think that's highly important. Obviously, we have some admin staff, of course, but the specialism, I think, is hugely important, and the local knowledge.
The word that you used in your presentation that shocked me was the word shock waves. That you said that the sector is going to have to get used to taking 11.2% cut this year, and next year is going to be even worse. I think we need a body that should be arguing for why this is not the case, because you do get to a certain level where beyond which it is not possible to sustain things. So I'll just say to you before I ask you a question, I think the Art Council needs to step up to the mark in that regard.
Could I just say in response to that, sorry to interrupt, or
You're
would you
allowed to
prefer if I wait? I just don't want to miss the point. Obviously, we're hugely concerned about that, of course, and I think we did run a very robust advocacy campaign, which we said, apologies, missed at the start, Basil, 23,000.
I saw the 23,000, and I also noted the response, the impact on it was 0.
Indeed.
So not the best campaign then in terms of outcomes. Could I ask you, if 23,000 people were to donate £10 per annum, you know, these 23,000 people that are really concerned about the arts, you know, would that make any difference? The £230,000, would that make any difference?
Not to core voted funds.
What about if they were to put £100?
Probably 5,000.
Go easy.
Again, we would make the argument that arts and culture are a fundamental right, along with all the other government priorities, the economy, education, health, because they bring so much
but the issue is, as you've said to me already, that there's going to be huge shock waves. It's bad, it's going to get worse. I'm not sure about the money coming from Europe, to be honest with you, though I admire the honesty. The issue here is, last budget, the Chancellor gave, I think, tax breaks to theatres, touring theatres, and ordinary, you know, sometimes up between 25%. So, what impact has that had on the profitability or otherwise? Because that's a cross subsidy, isn't it? That we haven't seen in our.
It doesn't apply in Northern Ireland as yet.
Right. So why not?
We haven't. Well, the legislation hasn't.
Okay.
It would have to come, I think, for.
So I think you should be arguing for that. And I want to mention one other thing on it. When I went to the Science Museum in London, they wouldn't let me through the door unless I signed a tax covenant. I mean, literally, they said, we'll take the money, but you're not getting in until you claim back the tax. Does such an opportunity exist for cultural activity in Northern Ireland?
Some venues, I think, would have initiatives like that, but not across the board. But certainly some of the larger venues will be looking at those interventions.
So if I just finish on this point, because obviously there's a lot of issues that brought up, it strikes me when I hear from a lot of the cultural activity, the biggest problem is empty seats, that only 50%, I think the Lyric was declaring. And I looked at, when we talked about the Ulster Orchestra, they also had a lot of capacity. I do think there is some way that we need to get people to make long-term commitments to the arts that take advantage of tax breaks, that gives them guaranteed seats at reduced prices, that does something. And I think a body, I don't know who it is, but I suspect that somebody has to take this forward. And I think this is the new, you know, you keep talking to me about new models of business and things like that. I have yet to see or to hear what these new models of business might look like.
I think that's one you've just touched on. One of the issues that we've touched on with SIB and the conversations about how we move forward and look at new ones is the levels of patronage, the levels of trust fund, all of the other mechanisms for fundraising, and some of those things that you've mentioned I think are going to come into that equation. How do we move forward and get sustainable income on the longer term that isn't necessarily reliant on public funding?
Thank you.
Chair, I want to ask just one question of Europe, just on that, because we're through, but just one question in Europe. Just on the issue, I mean, you were actually, Sean, quite honest on the matter. 8 organisations getting funding seems to me to be the usual suspects getting involved in the usual programmes. You know, the University of Ulster goes and does something. What can you do to actually go beyond the normal people turning up and say we're going to get real more money out? What can you add to this particular funding issue?
Okay, of the 8 organisations, that was of the previous programme, so up until 2013. So we've had a number of applications. What we're doing is getting out into the sector. Since the beginning of this year, in the first quarter, we have delivered 8 public-facing events with the sector across the media sub-programme and the cultural sub-programme. Last year, because we only had the actual programme running from April, we engaged with about 450 people across the sector. We've already met about 300 people at our public-facing events in the first quarter of this year, and we're delivering those events in Belfast and in
1 year from now, 1 year from now, what will the figure be if it's not 8?
I would hope that it's greater, but I think the key thing to remember is that Creative Europe is a slow burner. It's a new programme. The challenge for organisations is that they need to find partners across Europe and partnerships that are going to be long-standing. So you have to be very careful about who you're going to partner with over the course of a 4-year project. These partnerships take time to develop. So I would imagine that it's going to take time to build this programme. And because organisations obviously have to work collaboratively on these programmes, because it's a holistic project in the sense that, you know, you'll have a lead partner, you'll also have other associated partners. Within a cooperation project, you need at least 3 partners, so that would be, for example, the Northern Ireland organisation, and at least 2 others, because over the course of the development of the project, someone might fall off the course, so you need at least 2. There's a challenge there in itself to identify who the partners might be, and then to actually identify the European issue that your project might address. So it's going to take some time to develop the partnerships and the project proposals and the applications, and then once they get to the stage of application, obviously it's hugely competitive because you're competing against the rest of Europe.
Thank you. Oliver McMullen.
Yes, very quickly, when you looked at your funding, did you in any way rural-proof it, urban-rural, when you looked at the funding?
We look at that issue of geographic spread, Oliver, very seriously. However, it has to be said, as I think you'll be aware, there's a large concentration of arts organisations in Belfast and in Londonderry, and they're not a huge number across the rest of Northern Ireland. However, there are receiving venues which do brilliant work, and we've got the Arts Centre within a 20-mile radius. So it's really important that the organisations that we're funding are touring to those venues and bringing the work where there isn't already an arts organisation or an infrastructure on the ground. However, there are a number of very good community-based organisations who are doing great work in rural communities. And in our draft community arts strategy, we have a proposal to do a rural pilot project, or a number of rural pilot projects. So we're very conscious of that. But again, if you look at the totality of our funding, beyond simply the annual funding programme, yes, which is where we do commit most of our grant and aid. However, we get a better spread across all of Northern Ireland. So we have to look at it in the totality.
Right, okay. And did we cut any of the money going towards disability or special needs?
Tiny, I think a tiny percentage.
Well,
of
I think
that.
the only thing that came off that area was the Voluntary Arts Network, which Noreen has, that falls into our health and disability type category. But no, in essence, and there was one arts and disability organisation which actually received an uplift in its grant of £15,000, which is the Arts and Disability Forum. And again, that was because for a number of years they have been dependent on monitoring round funding, if you like, to deliver the Bounce Festival, which is the Disability Arts Festival. It was extremely successful. And so we took this opportunity to amalgamate that with their funding grant, so they actually got an increase.
I would like the arts to go back out into the rural areas more, because I do take what you're saying there. Most of your money goes into the urban areas, Derry, Belfast. And there's an argument for that. But at the same time, I think you have to get out into the rural areas. With the amalgamation of councils, I think you have a great chance now. And I would like to see you feeding into the community plans.
Yes.
For councils, which I'm sure you're doing. But there has to be more money for the arts in the rural areas. Even if they haven't got venues, we can't rely on touring companies, because those touring companies have been cut, so they can't come out. They're left with the status quo in the countryside. We're not getting the arts, and you can't expect them to travel 40 miles to see venues in large towns. So I think if you have an input into the new councils, it could maybe generate the councils who are now going to have dedicated European officers work with yourself, help the councils draw down European funding to help the arts. But I do think you need to get out to talk to the councils.
Yeah.
I think that would be a great step forward now that the community plans have been drawn up.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh,
Sorry, Chair, can I just throw a last question in there? When you were before us, I think some of the delegation we looked at the general population survey. I think Lorraine, you'd spoken on it, Lorraine. That was before Christmas. With the situation facing us currently, you're still focused on the outcomes of that survey and still working on where the arts can go in relation to what the populace wants, basically?
Yes, very much so. If I could maybe say something that will partly address that, Chairman, but also some of the points I think that Basil raised. I'm sure you're aware that the Minister has established a Ministerial Arts Advisory Forum, and that's made up of sector organisations, the Arts Council's represented on it, and what she's tasked us with is developing a 10-year strategy for the arts, which is quite a challenge, I have to say. But we've commenced work on that. There's also a ministerial reference group which is made up of all the government departments and other relevant ALBs, and they are sort of a touchstone group that strategy will be brought back to try and gain buy-in across all of the executive. And I think that is where a lot of the issues that Mr McRae has raised will be addressed through that more longer-term developmental plan of how we're going to get from A to B and undertake this journey. So I think that, as I said, is a challenge, but I think it'll be helpful, and that will be where we're trying to corral a lot of the needs, obviously, of the sector, the central importance of the arts and why public subsidy is important. That case will be set out very strongly, evidenced by case studies, facts and figures, and the general population survey, of course, because, you know, there's a high level of buy-in, over 75%, I think, of people who attend the arts. And so, you know, surveys like that, as well as our own regularly funded or now annually funded organisation survey, give some very rich data, and we will be using that to help inform the strategy as to why the arts are of central importance, why they deserve subsidy, why they need to be subsidised, and indeed how we can move forward, hopefully, without being too negative, that if we cast forward to 10 years, we could be in a better position by then. But how do we manage the transition in the interim? So I think that strategy, hopefully with executive buy-in, when it's completed, will set out some of those issues and give you confidence.
Thanks. Thank you.
Could I just very quickly just make two questions there? First one was, there is a small capital equipment fund that used to exist within. Is that still exist, and is that from lottery money or the?
We don't have an equipment fund
There's
at
no
all
equipment
at the
fund
moment.
anymore.
The only money we have had in recent years has been, we had a small amount of capital which came from DCAL 2 years ago, but we haven't had an equipment fund since.
Right. That existed for quite a long number of years.
It did, and then with the move to project funding and other types of funding, unfortunately, that has fallen off the list.
Thank you. Secondly, you said you're moving to a new model of literature rather than the publishing movies. In 2 sentences, maybe, could you just give me a flavour of that?
Yes. Very simple model, Chairman. Organisations, literary organisations, come and apply for their titles. So when we open our scheme this month, our lottery project scheme, we would expect an application from Blackstaff and Guildhall to set out the applications that they want to produce this year with what they need per title, and then with that we will be able to identify the titles that we might be able to support.
And that would be done on an annual basis? It's an annual thing, or could some other publisher come in 6 months into the year?
Well, other publishers come in all the time.
All the time.
In fact, we support...
So it'd be a rolling...
Well, no, sorry, it's project funding, which is open on an annual basis, but we also have publishers who come in under our small grants programme,
All right,
which
okay.
is a rolling programme.
Yeah.
That's fine.
We actually fund much more than just Blackstaff and Guildhall already under both small grants and under lottery project funding. For example, Gallery Press, which is the premier poetry press in Ireland, and we fund them to publish our titles and our poets from Northern Ireland. Really impressive suite from Michael Longley. Seamus Heaney was a close associate. Michael Longley, Durkin, etc. So all of our great poets from Northern Ireland are within that press.
Okay. Look, thank you very much indeed. It's been a wide-ranging session, and I use that term loosely. Extremely wide-ranging, but helpful in that I think it has helped us all to get a better understanding of where we are, the challenges at the moment, the challenges going forward to next year, and also some opportunities in the midst of it all about maybe some reconfiguration. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Cheers. Over mine.
Okay, thank you very much, folks. That was useful. I'm sure you found it too. Our next presentation is from NI Screen about their savings delivery plan, and you've got the Clark's memo at page 76, the NI Screen briefing paper at page 78, the NI Screen operating plan at page 8 of the table papers. And we have with us this morning Richard Williams, the Chief Executive, and Linda Martin, the Head of Finance. So I'll invite you to make your opening statement to us. Apologies for keeping you some time there, but you can see there is a considerable interest in the whole area of arts funding, and it's important to give members an opportunity just to raise the various questions. Okay, thanks very much if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Well, to start off with quickly, we are just entering the second year of our 4-year strategy, Opening Doors, which is primarily funded by DETI through Invest Northern Ireland. In the first year of that, strategy, we have achieved most of the things that we wanted to achieve. We've shifted successfully to a strategy that's designed to deliver a balanced screen industry with strength not only in large-scale production, which is things like Game of Thrones or the Dracula film, but also television drama, independent film, factual entertainment, television, animation, digital content, particularly gaming. In terms of highlights from last year, the animation was hugely successful. Lily's Driftwood Bay, Puff and Rock and Zig and Zag are all animation projects that are doing very well in the young people's market. Television drama has been equally strong, with Frankenstein Chronicles, a project for ITV, joining what has become our staple returning series, The Fall and Line of Duty from BBC. Independent film had an equally strong year. Obviously, probably the most high-profile bit of that has been Boogley and Graham, the short film that won a BAFTA and was Oscar nominated, but also we supported 3 other locally produced, directed independent films. One, The Survivalist, hasn't been screened at Tribeca, the New York Film Festival yet, but has had its press screenings, and all of the critics were very positive about that project, so we're excited about what's happening there, not to mention the huge success that the feature documentary Road on the Dunlop dynasty had in the last year, including reimagining the financial model for that sort of project. It did enormously well, selling on Amazon and iTunes and those sort of outlets. In factual entertainment television, we had the biggest breakthrough we've had in 10 years in a startup company called Stellify, backed by Sony, has been commissioned by the BBC to make a very large-scale, very ambitious entertainment show called Can't Touch This. while in digital and particularly in gaming, at the outset of the Opening Doors strategy, we undertook to try and drive gaming and digital content harder, and we appointed an expert in that field, and he led our first trade mission out to San Francisco to the Games Development Conference there, and is working closely with the newly created private sector Gaming NI grouping. So that's going well. Within the Irish Language Broadcast Fund, they also had a very strong year. Probably critically, the highlight of that was Anne Brontenas, a drama series that had two forms. Was a television drama series and was also cut as a film. It was Ireland's nomination to be considered as a foreign film at the Oscars. It also won at the Boston Irish Film Festival. Another project an education project from Tubber, won at the Appies, which is the digital awards in Dublin, and probably most recently broadcast a successful series on the Mourne Mountains. Ulster Scots Broadcast Fund has been equally energetic over the last 3-4 months. The two notable series in Imagining Ulster, which went out a couple of months ago, and certainly provoked a degree of discussion and interest. And also Then Sings My Soul went out a similar time frame and to positive response. Five Fables, another Ulster Scots project, is nominated for two awards at the Celtic Media Festival, which is coming up next week, and I would be I'm sure I shouldn't say this in a public forum, but I'd be surprised if it didn't win one of those two awards. I'm certainly hoping that it will. Within the decal-funded aspects of our strategy, we had, as you're very well aware, we had a very anxious period before Christmas, where we thought we might be facing into a scenario where our funding from decal would go from a high point 2 years ago of 3 million a year down to 1 million a year. With the help of tremendous support from our stakeholders, and most critically the beneficiaries and users of their services, through the public consultation, that position has shifted, and we have an indicated budget for this year of 1.87 million. Secured by the Minister, which obviously is considerably less than 3 million, but is a lot more than 1 million. And we do believe, we have calculated that the 1.87 million is sufficient for us to keep, which is the critical thing for us, is to sustain the main core elements of the ecosystem, the educational, cultural ecosystem that goes alongside the economic work that is supported by Invest Northern Ireland. In terms of the detail of that 1.87 million will allow us to keep the doors open on the 3 creative learning centres, at the Nerve Centre in Derry, and Nerve Belfast in Belfast, obviously, and the AMA Centre in Armagh. The 3 creative learning centres are really the backbone and the most important driver within our education strategy and education work. To give you some indication of the scale of what they do, we worked in the last year. They'll have worked with 2,500 teachers. They also, importantly, exceeded their targets. We targeted them in the context of the Minister's policy priorities. We targeted them with working with at least 70% schools that are within the most deprived areas and with children in the greatest need, and they exceeded those targets. Over the three creative learning centres, they hit 75% on that target. It also allowed us to continue our after-school film clubs, which are delivered through Into Film, and with the delivery by Cinemagic and the Nerve Centre. They reach at the moment over 260 schools right across Northern Ireland. There were questions in the previous session about penetration and reach in different areas. The 260 schools, after school film club schools, two things to say about them. One, they are all they're all schools that have the greatest level of need within our education system, and they are spread right across Northern Ireland. It's also allowed us to continue our support, and for these organisations it would have been lights out if they didn't have our support, our support of Cinemagic, of the Foyle Film Festival, of Culture Tech, and of Belfast Film Festival. And quick plug for Belfast Film Festival, which opens tonight with Mark Cousins' film I Am Belfast, and we'll go on for the next 12 days or so. They're tremendous supporters of the local content that's produced here and work very closely with us. Lastly, it's allowed us to continue our work on the Digital Film Archive, which also, another plug, we're relaunching the Digital Film Archive on Friday at the Ulster Museum. And I sometimes think, Chair, I can recall saying this to you before, I think the Digital Film Archive is actually our strongest tool in terms of outreach and social inclusion, for the simple reason that one of our primary and most successful audiences for the Digital Film Archive are folks in nursing homes who, you maybe not surprisingly, respond enormously well to archive material from the 40s, 50s and 60s, which obviously reflects periods of their life. This is all, as far as we're concerned, a very positive story, but it's not to say that there haven't been casualties as a result of the cuts in the savings delivery plan. There have been cuts. We've sought as far as we possibly can to protect frontline services. And I said already that we wanted to sustain the whole ecosystem, and I think we can do that. We've applied a 5% cut almost completely across the board. The creative learning centres have been saved from that, but everything else, obviously including our own overheads, has received a 5% cut as relates to how we will deal with that cut in terms of our own overheads. We are expecting, as it came up in the previous session, but we are expecting to avail of the voluntary exit scheme to a modest degree. Maybe most significantly, and it's a great disappointment, I know, to the Northern Ireland Screen Board, we dropped an ambition that we'd only recently really developed, which was to become much more involved in developing and supporting education provision for coding. With support of Coder Dojos, which are sort of similar after-school clubs, if you like, to what we do with after-school film clubs. We think that coding and coding education is a very important element of a successful future for the economy in Northern Ireland, and I think that is something that needs to be addressed. It doesn't particularly need to be addressed by Northern Ireland Screen, but we are disappointed that we have stepped back from that. Another thing that we stepped back from was we had ambitions to pilot a digital apprenticeship scheme that was going to more aggressively target social inclusion. We were considering working with the Prince's Trust to develop that, but we've had to put that in the back burner. And the third thing to face very considerable cuts is that we have greatly reduced our contribution to Fab Lab, which is a nerve centre initiative around the STEAM agenda, using 3D printers in education forums. We've had to reduce our commitments to that. But overall, we are pleased, or at least content, that the funding indications for this year allow us to sustain the ecosystem, the educational cultural ecosystem that as far as we are concerned, is required if we're actually going to maximise the economic benefit, particularly the longer-term economic benefit of what we're doing within the screen industries. And the other, probably the primary reason we are content with the indicative outcome is that our understanding is that it's taking us, historically when we had £3 million of funding from DCAL, we attracted that through a whole range of different projects, project funding. We were doing very well. Any time there was either a sort of cross-departmental project, we would usually be able to attract funding from it. For short-term funds, we tended to attract funding from it, which was very good. But it's not so good when you're into a cutting position and all those programs, all those short-term programs disappear. And that was why we were facing the possibility of our budget going from 3 million to 1 million. The indication is that the 1.87 million is our new baseline, and that sounds a good deal more stable than our previous funding structure. So it's one of the reasons we're reasonably satisfied with the outcome. Well, that's it for now, Chair.
Thank you. First question there, Councillor Hoshin.
Chair, yeah, I heard a video report there this morning on the Belfast Film Festival, and they had feared a 50% cut.
Correct.
Seem content, I wouldn't say satisfied, but content perhaps with the subsequent 5% cut. How essential is the like of that, and indeed the Foyle Film Festival, to the local production sort of end of things?
Well, I think all of the festivals are very important, and the more we grow the screen industries, and the screen industries are growing here significantly, the more important the festivals become, because the way I see it is that they are what we need. The screen industries aren't routes into them in terms of jobs and opportunities are not clear, and they're not standardised, like going into the civil service or becoming a doctor. So seeing for them to be visible to young people and the community generally is extremely important, and the festivals, all the festivals, Cinemagic, Belfast Film Festival, Foyle Film Festival, play their part in that. I also think there has to be. We couldn't have a successful screen industry, and this is at the heart of the Opening Doors strategy. We couldn't have a successful screen industry that was entirely based on content developed elsewhere, that is simply utilising our services and our crew and our infrastructure. We have to have our own stories within it, and we have to celebrate those stories, and the festivals play a strong part in that. Belfast Film Festival in particular will showcase three significant, a number of others, but three significant films produced locally and directed locally within its programme over the next 10 or 12 days.
Chair, I should maybe have declared an interest that trained up under the Irish Language Broadcasting Fund, and I just see that a colleague who was on the same Philip McCaffmore, his company Tubber at the Appy Awards there in Dublin. Is there still scope there within MI Screen and elsewhere for people who are coming out of the likes of that sort of background, or indeed elsewhere, for placement and development, then their own development of saying that perhaps their own standalone companies?
Very much so, yes. I mean, there are. Within the Irish Language Broadcast Fund, there's still, still 250,000 set aside for training related activities every year, including both new entrant training and training further up the skills level, and across Northern Ireland Screen more generally. We are, as the sector has grown, so the opportunities grow. So the importance of training and skills development becomes greater. That's a very big focus for us. Now, what I would say specifically about the Irish language sector is that it is finite. It's in global terms, it's relatively small, and it can only we see the whole of the screen industries in terms of the ecosystem, and each element of the ecosystem can only sustain a certain number of people. So, for example, we do have to keep an eye on how many new entrants we are bringing into any element of the sector, because you inevitably reach a point, if you simply push new entrants, you reach a point where actually all you're doing is undermining the opportunities for last year's new entrants, because you're bringing in subsidised new entrants this year. So you do have to just keep a focus and a holistic view of the whole ecosystem. But the Irish language sector is doing enormously well, including, importantly, beginning to internationalise, which has the economic impact of bringing other finance to the table. So there are opportunities, yes.
It's a bit of a shame because the BBC hasn't really moved much on it in recent times, like in terms of production costs. But okay, thank you, Chair.
Basil McRae, please.
I was amazed that you managed to get an uplift of £800,000 on a budget of £1 million in the current financial circumstances. Would you care to explain to us how you've worked this bit of magic?
For one, Basil, I wouldn't call it magic, and I wouldn't. As I was trying to explain, the decal budget for Northern Ireland Screen is complex because it's been made up of project funding. So while you could say, and it was certainly the case, and we certainly felt it was real, that we were facing potential of a budget of £1 million, it is equally true that 2 years back we received £3 million. So, you know, as much as you can say we pushed it up from 1 to 1.8, it also dropped down from 3 to 1.8. To answer the question, I mean, any which way we got a good result from where we were sitting. My understanding of that, but I'm not, I don't see the full picture. But my understanding of that is that there was a response to the extent of the contributions from end users, particularly of the creative learning centres and.
I've just said, Richard, the Arts Council had 23,000 people applied and said we really need more money, and the result was, yeah, you're still getting your 11.2% cut. You have got significantly more funds than you did have in the draft budget, up from 1 million to 1.87 million. This is a good result for you. I'm not chastising you. I'm asking you, how did you do it?
I think, I mean, you have to, you know, I'm not comfortable with the comparator element, because it's certainly not for the screen industries to be competing with the complementary and interconnected arts sector. But the elements that were facing cutting, Basil, were hugely well aligned to the ministerial priorities in terms of the extent to which they're targeted at those with greatest need. That would be one aspect of it. I get the sense that our message that this is an ecosystem, and that
could I just ask you, what percentage of your funding comes from DETI?
We will receive from DETI this year something between 8 million and 10.7 million.
And what will you receive from DECAL?
1.87.
See, it always surprises me that you have this hybrid funding where you're getting 8 to 10 million from DETI and yet you're responding into DECAL. What sort of cut have you had from DETI?
Well, I suppose the shortest answer to that is we don't know, and we won't know for quite some time, because the arrangement that we have with Invest Northern Ireland, and have had last year as well as this, is that we have, at the start of a financial year, we have a guarantee of 8 million, but we are working to a strategy that is 10.7 million.
And the only point, I am supportive, as you know this, but I will just point out, Chair, in terms of oversight, it's pretty hard to do oversight when you have people in front of you that have said, we were down to 1 million, we're now up to 1.87, but by the way, we've 8 million coming from another department, and it might be 10 million, but we're not sure. The issue in this is about clarity of purpose, about because I support a lot of things that you do, and in fact I am really disappointed that Coder Dojo in particular has not received what is £115,000. I mean, if anything is going to get this country moving forward, it's young coders coming in. And I take your point, Richard, that maybe it's not your specific remit to do it, but somebody has to do it, so I can take that. Could I just ask you one last question? It's an open question. See, NI Screen. Excuse me, I always get that wrong. Is it NI Screen or Screen NI? NI Screen. Sorry, I used to get that mixed up. NI Screen. The challenge is about film, or at least that's what I thought it was. But you could be looking at things like community TV. I know that you fund into some of the Irish language acts in there, but I wonder why we're not extending our film festivals into community television and then perhaps onwards to content provision into America on the public service network out that way. I mean, is there any work that your organisation would look at in that regard?
I think I only partially understand the question. I mean, the festivals do work with NVTV in particular to a degree, and certainly have considerable.
So let me just, if you don't understand, let me just rephrase it. We went because the community TV came and spoke to us. I went to see them, so I saw the Irish language students that they have there. That was interesting. And then say we have this great opportunity to punt content to America. You know, there's people look at, but nobody's quite got it together.
Okay, well, I think there are two elements to that. I think we are, within the context of the Ulster Scots Broadcast Fund, we will be looking at NVTV in the near future, because NVTV have had a very significant change in their model recently, which you're aware of, which is that they now sit on button 8 or button 9 of Freeview.
Yes.
So there is now considerable potential for them to be viewed by significant audiences in a way that wasn't really the case in the past, which makes them considerably more significant in terms of reaching audiences, or potentially reaching audiences in Northern Ireland. I wouldn't really accept, or I would trigger a note of caution in terms of that then playing out in terms of reaching audiences in America. I think the way I would describe it, we all now sit with televisions that have enormous numbers of channels, the vast majority of which none of us ever look at. We would have no awareness of even of the titles of the channels.
Right.
It is possible to be broadcasting merrily in the States or indeed any other country for long periods of time without anybody actually watching it. And I would suggest that might be the case with some elements of the US element of that, but I would take a completely different view in terms of the potential of NVTV in Northern Ireland, because it's sitting very high up the buttons.
I won't detain you any further, but I will say that I think there's an opportunity for Ulster Scots to come forward on this as well. And I just think somebody has to take the lead on it, and I was just inquiring as to whether it was NI Screen should be doing that or some other body. But I'll finish that question. You can.
Well, certainly, I mean, NVTV have approached us in the context of the Ulster Scots Broadcast Fund, and the Ulster Scots Broadcast Fund Committee will be reviewing that possibility in the very near future. It would be wrong for me. I'm not sure what the outcome of that will be. The limitation of NVTV obviously is it's still Belfast, so anywhere else in Northern Ireland you're not going to reach it. But it has very considerable reach compared to what it had, 2 months ago.
Karen McKevitt.
Yep, thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. I just want to pick up on something that Basil had raised there, what you'd said in your presentation, and that's about stepping back from the like of the coding education and indeed the digital apprenticeship schemes which you had planned. Way back at the beginning of our mandate here, 2011, there was a Creative Industries inquiry, and out of that inquiry, including yourselves were involved in it as well. I mean, it did come about the education and the careers advice for students and bringing them into that, how to promote that and the lack of knowledge on it. And I sort of thought that was starting to begin addressed when we did hear that you were maybe thinking about coding education and about delivering on a digital apprenticeship and stuff.
Well,
what happened with the Princess Trust and yourselves that's not going to happen?
Oh,
now?
nothing.
It can't all be budgetary.
Oh, yes, it can. Well, the first thing to be clear about is that when you go back to the Creative Industries inquiry and the need for visible routes into the sector, we are addressing that extremely strongly, and that's why the Creative Learning Centres, in particular, are the element of our education and cultural work that receive no cut from us, because they are the key. They are the key piece of infrastructure in driving that, with, if you like, secondary support by the festivals. You are correct, in my view, in your assertion that those aspects are getting better, and they're getting better primarily because of the work of the Creative Learning Centres in terms of, but also in terms of the feeding as a result, which is interconnected with the Creative Learning Centres, the feeding as a result of the success of Moving Image Arts, GCSE and A-level, which is effectively attracting talent at a much earlier point. It's getting better also because of an initiative by the BFI, the British Film Institute, which we have supported strongly, where we have Easter Academies, which for school-age children, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, allowing them exposure to the highest levels of experience within the film industry. We also don't get the impression that we have stepped back from what we would call modern apprenticeships. We will have on our books this year, if everything goes to plan, somewhere between 40 and 50, 18-month-long apprenticeships within the screen industries. The single project that dropped away, and it dropped away only for monetary reasons, was we were looking at piloting a project that was going to be more focused and more aggressive, if you like, at targeting those in greatest need, and that has fallen away for monetary reasons.
Step back was your own terminology in your presentation. That's why I used it just when you were speaking about the both. But I mean, the film industry growth here has been, particularly in the past couple of years, when we've had big films and being promoted and filmed in Northern Ireland, like Dracula or Philomena and whatever else comes to mind. Do you know what I mean? How are we going to fill the gap? You know, because like you have outreach programmes to your schools where you're after film clubs, 260 schools. That's fantastic. It's opening doors to people that probably maybe would never have been introduced to the digital end, other than maybe social media or something like that. What would be using. How are we going to fill? Or what's your plan to be able to fill that gap? Because we were doing really well, you know.
The skills gap. Yeah. Well, that's the biggest. I mean, within the Opening Doors strategy, the development of skills is, one of two or three number one priorities. As I say, we have we have a series of modern apprenticeships across gaming, animation, factual television. We have trainees that are placed within Game of Thrones and the other projects. And all of our projects have trainees placed on them. We have other exciting developments like the new animation degree at the University of Ulster under Professor Maguire that is delivering highly skilled people into the sector now on a yearly basis. And there are a whole range of different interventions and initiatives designed to ensure that we keep the skills. For me, the key thing to that is sustaining the ecosystem, because you know, at the same time that you're developing the skills, you have to make sure that you continue to attract the work, or actually you're simply training people for export. So it is all about the whole ecosystem. It's all about valuing the economic, cultural and educational value in equal measure, and keeping an eye on the balance between it all.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Gordon?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. Yeah, I was going to make the point about the apprenticeships, but I think it has been well covered. Just clarify how your organisation works. I have been down to Titanic Studios through the EDI committee, which I'm on, and it's certainly very impressive setup. And it obviously comes in under the £8-10 million budget that you talked about. I take it the running of all that structure down there. And then the budget that we're looking at here, how are the two run separately? Can you clarify that first, please?
Try to. Well, the first thing to say is Titanic Studios is privately owned and run. There was a period of time at the outset when we took a lease on the paint hall and ran it directly, but that's a long time in the past. But yes, our support of Game of Thrones and Titanic Studios and all of that comes
through Invest.
Through Invest.
Do they run separately then from
well,
the 1.8 million budget we're looking at here today?
Yes, I mean yes and no. I mean some aspect of that. I mean Decal provides 24% of our overheads at Northern Ireland Screen. So you know in that. So if you take us as people, there is a percentage of us that's been paid for by Decal. There's a percentage that's been paid by Invest, and indeed another small percentage by DCMS and the BFI and whatever. We try and there's a very clear line as to what all of the money is spent on. So I can tell you exactly. There's no. It isn't merged into a single pot. I can tell you exactly what all of the Decal money is spent on, and it's spent on the culture and educational aspects. But we do, I mean, to some extent, going back to Basil's point, I mean, we do seek to deliver it as an integrated package. As I say, our strategy is based on the notion that we have to sustain the whole ecosystem, and that has probably, like other elements of society, that ecosystem has bits that relate to all different government departments. So that obviously our key two at the moment are DEDI and Decal, but quite frankly, the Department of Education and DEL are of equal importance to the sector. It's just the nature of government structure that splits it down in that way.
Okay, and your organisation, are you responsible as well for the production side? You mentioned here about all these films and so on.
Absolutely, that's.
You are?
Yeah, yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, you have an overall responsibility for that, which in the main has been very successful, really, and I think we all recognise that, as you described earlier. Just on the schools then, it talks about the after-schools film clubs, which obviously is continuing, some slightly reduced, I suppose, 304,000. How do you go about identifying the various schools that you go into?
Well, the primary and aligned to the ministerial priority, the primary way of identifying those schools is using the Department of Education's definition of extended schools, which are the schools that they define as being the schools that have the catchment, the catchment in greatest need. That's the number one way of defining those schools. We do also include special schools and those institutions that deal with young people that have been excluded from schools. But primarily we use the extended schools definition that the Department of Education uses.
So where would most of them be, in the inner city areas, or is there a spread throughout the various boards?
Oh, they're spread all over the place. I have a map in the office that shows me where all of those schools are, and they are spread, pretty evenly right across Northern Ireland.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned there that about your funding, where it comes from. The DCMS element, they are presumably paying for staff costs to administer the Irish language broadcast from the Ulster Scots. Does that money come out of the actual funds themselves, or is that an addition?
No, that comes out of the funds. The two respective funds pay a proportion of.
Okay, that's fine. The second thing there, you mentioned the Imagining Ulster series, series of 3 programmes, which I thought was very good, and there have been some excellent programmes there. And you also mentioned there about the Ulster Scots Committee looking at the issue around NVTV and so on. We're coming towards the end of the cycle there with the two funds, and then there'll be the negotiation about how that develops going forward. In terms of the Ulster Scots one, where it is different in a number of ways from the Irish language one with the type of programming, the issue of ensuring that there is high quality in terms of content, that it's not Ulster Scots light, but that the Ulster Scots element is maximised. And there have been some programmes that are very good, others where you could have been a bit more done to I think maybe beef up and strengthen that, because there were bits left out. But there are others that are, I would suggest, maybe a bit ropey in terms of they might be quite attractive in terms of the audience that they will appeal to, but the Ulster Scots content was very light. Is there going to be a piece of work done going forward, so that if there's another cycle, the money delivers the maximum value?
Well, I mean, all of the funds need to be continually reviewed, and not particularly connected to the fact that there will need to be a recommitting from DCMS to both the Ulster Scots Broadcast Fund and the Irish Language Broadcast Fund. But the Ulster Scots Broadcast Fund is still relatively new, and it's it's still maturing and evolving, and there is a piece of work being undertaken to assess with the stakeholders what everybody thinks.
Who is that being done with?
Well, it's there are a whole range of stakeholders. The agency has undertaken to bring together a number of stakeholder groupings within Ulster Scots. So we're also bringing together the production companies and indeed the broadcasters,
okay.
and the committee. To your point about Ulster Scots Light, or very light, I think is your accusation. There is and always will be a balance to be struck and a decision to be made between the number of people that you reach and the if you like, the density of the detail. And it applies. That's not specific to Ulster Scots. That applies to all sorts of programming. So I would argue. So if you took, for example, the series that have gone out on UTV, they reach enormous numbers of people, not only in Northern Ireland but also in Scotland, and also now with UTV Ireland in the Republic of Ireland as well. And I would submit that when you're reaching those sort of numbers, even if the Ulster Scots is light, maybe very light, you are still getting a message to a very large number of people. What I would suggest is it's about the success and appropriateness of the content over the whole portfolio over time, and there is absolutely no doubt. And I think I can speak on behalf of the committee in saying this. There are still considerable gaps in terms of what should appropriately be covered, but provided that DCMS recommits, I'm sure the committee will plug those gaps over time.
Okay. Oh, William, were you in for a question or no? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. That was very helpful, and
Sure.
thank you for your presentation there. I will. Just right now. Yeah. Just in terms of actions, it might be appropriate if we wrote to the department to ask where MSBs sit in the reconfigured departmental structures.
We also ask, I would be interested in this figure between 8 and 10 million pounds.
Yeah, absolutely.
In what regard?
Well, they don't know, and they're into the year, and they don't know what the budget is, but it could be an extra, £2 million, which is, our
My
budget.
recollection from the committee's inquiry into creative industries, there's a mechanism by which they draw down the additional funding. Now, off the top of my head, I can't remember the detail, but we can write and clarify what that mechanism is. Committee members will recall from the inquiry there was a lot of discussion around the fact that NI-Screen has this very unusual situation where it is accountable to two departments, and the committee did consider how that could be modified. But
Leslie's made the point, though, that we're into this year and we still don't know whether it's 8 or 10 million. At the same time, we're seeing falls. It's a question of oversight. Someone needs to be able to ask the question on the financial resources available.
It may well, before I was on the committee, but it may well have something to do on the deputy side, particularly with the mechanism for drawing down and so on.
that might also be usefully pursued from that angle, from the Eddie angle as well. I know some members sit on that committee.
Yeah, but Chair, he did say there that they wished, and it's quite common sense, I think, to present a united front across the spectrum of their activities. But the outstanding question, with that kind of vagary about budgeting going on, and the very small part we play in that, it seems likely that there is cross-subsidisation. So if we start to argue about the minutiae of the decal budget, it pales into insignificance against the other.
The cross-subsidisation thing, because I had some knowledge of that from Des and Decal. The decal side of it is very much defined as certain particular pieces of work, and it's not around the big film making and all of that investment. That's totally DETI. So the two are complementary but distinct. I think the more pertinent questions probably are around those two issues that we've identified. One, where they sit in the future, and secondly, the issue about how they draw down money, and therefore why there is at the start of the year maybe some uncertainty as to how much they will draw down.
Yeah, but Chair, if they're apportioning costs, you can change that apportionment. So there's cross-subsidisation.
But the amount of, the cost of doing some of their work around the decal side of it is around the Cinemagic type thing, or the culture, it's the educational type community stuff, the archive material as well. It's all around those things. Now, a lot of that is simply administering grants and handing them out to various organisations. So it's not a particularly onerous aspect of it. where there would be massive levels of.
The only update, the only increase that this department, Culture, Arts and Leisure, got after the publishing of the draft budget was £800,000 for NI Screen, and I think £200,000 on inescapables from the Records Office. It's a really significant, we're supposed to do scrutiny on this, and it's very hard to do scrutiny if, like I had a look at the figures, the 50% funding from DETI, 25% DCAL, 12% from the English DCMS, and I think a bit of lottery funding as well. Now, all I can tell you is just in terms of me, my statutory role here of trying to have oversight, it was probably before my time on the committee, but Leslie has hit the nail on the head here. There is cross-subsidising going on, and we're going to be halfway through the year before we know what it is. And I'm just flagging it to you that I don't know what it is I'm supposed to be oversighting at the moment.
And are there figures then that we need?
I just would like to come back to the question. I would like, whether we have to do it formally through writing to the Committee for Enterprise Trade and Investment, or whatever way we do it is, can somebody not tell us what the plan for NI Screen is from the other funders for this year?
I don't see a particular. It's an unusual situation where it does extend across the two departments. That's the way it has been. May change in the future. So, in terms of getting information about those sort of more detailed things, I think we can write and ask for that, certainly. Wouldn't be an issue about that. We can write and ask for that. Okay.
And there is a question, I don't know how to formulate it, so maybe you or the clerk will help me, but it seems to me that the £800,000, what Richard was telling us, came about because so much of the funding was in-year monitoring or short-term funding. That's why it went from 3 million to 1 million. Would it be possible to find out a little bit more detail about what the in-year monitoring or how the short-term funding came about that led us to have to do this, to put into, to increase the baseline? Is that something we could ask? Or
around core and additional budget?
I mean, formulate whatever way you want, but it's something along those lines.
And why it's also then always for those things the question of why something arose during the year as an additional pressure. Was it an opportunity that came along in the middle of the year or whatever?
Chair, because the money coming from Invest operates on a similar sliding mechanism, but that should be clarified and be comparable in terms of the correspondence that comes back.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our matters arising. First of all, you've got the correspondence tracker on page 87 and detailing where we are with those outstanding matters. And then on page 88, there's details of the levels of engagement that the arm's length bodies have had with funding streams managed by the EU. That was the letter issue response to. It was mentioned there that Forest na Gaeilge had got money out of something or other.
It was match funding from a fund.
It says none.
I think it's very new. I'm not sure whether it's actually what we were asking for was
maybe she's
money
talking about something
had. This is money to come. It's not been.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I think there's a differentiation
there. Then members can tend to note that at this stage. The department highlighted to the committee during its briefing on EU engagement that's undertaking an exercise with the arm's length bodies to scope the existing level of EU engagement and what might be done to increase this. We could write to the department and get an update on that activity, if you're happy enough to do that.
Great.
Correspondence at page 90 about the additional overheads from with the Public Record Office, and then also the staffing for the sub-regional programme. It says there for Prony that they had underestimated the issues regarding rates, electricity and facilities management costs.
Hard to believe.
Well, can we have the detail?
The subsequent post-project evaluation highlighted poor estimation of future running costs and the importance of improvements in this area featured in lessons learned. Now, at the time when Prony was being, the decision was being made on its location, there was certainly a big push to move it into Titanic Quarter. And one of the arguments, I think at the time, was financial. But maybe that the financial figures on which the decision was based may not have been entirely appropriate. The post-project evaluation of the building project, could we get some information about that? Is this a document that runs to about 1,000 pages or something?
No, the PPE is done in a certain format, so it shouldn't be a ridiculously long paper.
And then
Can you just ask specifically, what was the estimate for the rates for the electricity and the facilities management originally, and what is the actual?
You would think it would be hard to get the rates wrong.
Very hard, I would have thought.
It's fairly... doesn't change a lot, but we can ask for the two sets of figures.
I bet you it's facilities management.
Right. The sub-regional programme, an additional 240k will be required for staffing costs to deliver the programme. Staff required by a combination of existing staff and imported staff. Existing staff will be redeployed to this area as the requirement from the current regional stadiums programme reduces. There was another figure quoted of what was going to be, was it 400,000 I thought, or some figure. Remember previously about money being spent on bringing in staff to deliver the stadium programme?
I think that was from the same correspondence, Chair. I think that was what was identified before. I think that was the overall. There was 600 and 400 was the actual rollout of the programme itself in terms of getting it shovel ready, whereas the 240 out of the 640 was staffing. The 400 was actual programme facilitation money.
You're talking about bringing in 5 people or something?
Also, there's the potential where if you're seconding from another department, you have to pay for them. The parent department will no longer pay, so it's a transfer. So I imagine they've built in a fair bit of that because there'll be expertise outside the department. That may mean bringing in people from specialist units within other civil service departments.
Okay. Moves on then to
C.
Sorry, just I missed a point here. What we were seeking there was clarification regarding whether the staff involved are existing decal staff. That was the point, and they're saying then that they're okay. Brings us on then to Lagan Canal Trust, page 93. The committee agreed to seek an update on the proposed restoration of the Lagan Canal system. The Lagan Canal Trust submitted an outline business case for reopening of the Lagan navigation. However, a review by the department's economists highlighted the need for further work on the business case. DCAL is considering a strategic outline business case to be submitted to DFP with the intention of including a bid for funding of the reopening of Lagan navigation in the next spending review. And are you happy to forward that correspondence to the Lagan Canal Trust?
Great.
So.
Chair, that's been an awful long time, hasn't it? 2012. Was that stating the obvious then?
I think, Chair, that probably reflects the very changing nature of the financial climate within which they're operating in terms of money that might have been available and business cases potentially based on that, and then what is available, and again the revision of a business case to...
Would there be an opportunity, Chair, to have them along for a brief session just to find out what their plans are? Understood they'd got some property and whatnot, but
They got some?
Bought some property around Lisburn, part of the Lagan and that. The
trust.
Yeah, the trust and that. So it may be useful just for a brief update.
Chair, for members' agreement, then we'll see the briefing.
Yeah. On page 96 there, the DARD TRPSI scheme, TRIPSI, yes. A business case has been prepared for seeing 20,000 to support rural libraries during 15-16 following engagement with DCAL and DARD. The largesse of DARD never ceases to amaze me. A whole £20,000.
Has it been rural-proofed, Chairman?
Well, this is for everything for rural, so
that's good.
Generosity is boundless. Libraries NI has also confirmed they're continuing to engage with councils in relation to their community planning partnerships and have restated their desire to be recognised as a statutory partner. Our members content to note that at this point.
Yeah.
It's exactly been particularly productive from DARD when you look across all of the rural area and the role that libraries play in rural areas. £20,000.
Not good.
Libraries NI responded to members' query regarding the business case for Belfast Central Library redevelopment and have stated that they intend to meet with DCAL officials this month to progress this issue. In the table papers, there's a letter from the Department also regarding Belfast Central Library. The Department is considering the outlined business case submitted by Libraries NI, but due to its complexity and scale, it's unlikely that the final decision would be made quickly. The final decision will be taken considering the current financial pressures, the level of need, and the Minister's priorities of PET-PSE. That's it. Page 4 in your
table
paper. So if you're content to note that, keep a watching brief on that. Then page 37 of the table papers, the Department has forwarded additional information following the Strategic Angling Review briefing in March. Of particular interest to members is the future of the reservoirs held by NI Water. The Department states that NI Water is required to dispose of surplus assets, including reservoirs that are no longer used in the supply of water. These have been offered in the first instance to the public sector, but may subsequently be put in the open market. The Department has highlighted that currently there is not high demand for these assets.
No.
NI Water and DCAL have entered into a partnership agreement for the management of the fishing rights of 28 of NI Water's waterways, some of which are leased directly to angling clubs. Angling clubs that currently lease the fishing rights will continue to operate the fishery till the reservoir is disposed of or the new lease arrangements with DCAL start operating. It also informs members that the Tourism Growth Fund has not yet been established and criteria for applications to the fund has not yet been agreed. The letter provides members with more information regarding the catch and release scheme and provides some details on how to access information regarding lake locations and angling maps as requested. Are members content to note that at this stage?
Chair, this is one of the things we took up just I think recently there when we were taking evidence. We were told that these already have all been agreed. My understanding is a lot of the councils are still considering the issue because they were supposed to offer to them first of all on the basis that they provided them anyway. So it looks from that letter, Chair, that it is a done deal, that the councils are out of it.
Well, it would be. Does the letter not say that it's been offered first to councils?
And I think the Chair, the letter also strongly suggests that in terms of commercial sale, there's not a huge amount of commercial interest out there, so it is likely that there will be continued approaches to the public sector, and that's not even just councils, Chair. There was a lot of discussion around potential for other departments to use the assets as well, if they could develop a social purpose for them. When the committee looked at this before, and when we talked to water officials, there was a very strong feeling that if any public body could come up with a social purpose, they would be willing to look at it, and I think that still effectively stands.
Yeah, but we were told by Mr. McDevitt or Devitt that this was a done deal.
Those are the words that he used then?
He said that they had agreed the situation with DRD about the transfer to the department.
I don't think that precludes discussion with the councils or anything like that. I think the department had always indicated the view that if they could use the facilities for social purpose, they would, but they would still enter into discussion with any other public body that would also do that.
Yeah, Peter's been very diplomatic, but you can't have it both ways. Either it's a done deal or it's not.
I don't think it is.
That's what I would like to know.
But we need to go back just to see exactly what
Oliver.
Oliver.
There's a consultation going on in the reservoirs bill, And there's been no mention of that at all. There's been mention of councils who own reservoirs and the private ownership, etc., and clubs who own them. So that's all going on, but there's certainly been no mention of that at all. So I just would be wary of that there, because there'll be more of that come out when this whole thing has been discussed under the reservoirs bill. I certainly wouldn't. I shall not say it. So I just would.
Chair, reservoirs bill scheduled for week after next, I think, including a potential additional day. My understanding is currently it sits with approximately 250 suggested amendments.
Yeah,
It's going to be quite an epic discussion, I think. And as Mr. McMullen says, I think a lot of this will fall further out of that, because I know the Art Committee had discussed it as well.
Yeah, I would ask just to wait till we see how this develops within the discussion of the reservoir bill.
Yeah. Okay. Just for clarification, just around it, if we just, when the officials were in and what Mr. Devitt was supposed to say, was that recorded or?
We'll have the normal. It wasn't answered.
Yeah. We just get.
My own recollection off the top of my head was there was an element of not sure.
Right.
Yeah. But I think that was what I took out of it. We'll go back and.
I like surety, I have to say.
We'll go back and we'll check what that was. But I think as Mr. McMullen has highlighted, the upcoming reservoirs bill is a further complicating factor in all this.
It is, but it doesn't change the principle if they've already agreed it.
But we'll check back. We'll check back.
We're speculating, but we'll get some clarity around this.
Yes, that's good clarity.
And certainly as well. There's correspondence then from the Minister at page 43 of the Hill papers in regard to the cultural awareness strategy, which was the one between the GAA and Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland. The Minister's written to the Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland and the GAA to inform them that the OFM DFM Good Relations Funding Programme is now open and inviting applications for funding. The only issue there is that you get a break between, unless they keep their staff on, there's a break between what they have now and being an application to that, which could take some time as we...
Chairman, can I ask, in relation to that letter from the department to the Grand Lodge, and I presume the one to the GAA was the same date, it really didn't give the two organisations the, in my reading of it, the time to give the proper notice for redundancy in terms of employment law, if I'm right.
The point was made there that apparently this was a finite programme with a definite cut-off point.
Yeah, but was there a letter which preceded that letter, which basically, because obviously these organisations, well, I can only speak for one in terms of having met with the Grand Lodge, were lobbying for this to be continued.
Chair, the department set out, I think, in 2011 when it started, that it would have an end point of the 31st of March 2015, and there was no movement on that. It was a finite fund the department had. That was part of the criteria. It would be a set fund, and then potentially further funding if available, or a new programme came up. That they hadn't actually entered into any discussion around that because the money was a finite pot for that time period. CSR, it was CSR bound in the days when that was the CSR was due to finish in 15, and then it would have been a new CSR. So that was why there was no discussion, I suspect, because it was going to fall into a new CSR period at that stage, and now hasn't. The Good Relations Fund, I think, there was some discussion around this in the committee, and I think there was a feeling that was a more likely source of broader funding as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's just the one that we had.
Oh, right.
That was the initial.
All right, okay.
That's how it came to
Right.
us. Yeah.
Okay, the next item then is the table response to the Department regarding the committee's inquiries or queries around a budget for an assessment of Creativity Month. In her reply, the Minister has indicated that there is currently no formal assessment. However, consideration is being given to this going forward. Accompanying the letter are the general Creativity Month brochure and that of Libraries NI, which was given to members in hard copy.
Chair, can I just jump in there? The letter is there in hard copy. The two brochures are extensive and in full colour. We have not been able to copy those. We did not have access to the appropriate colour machine. But those will be emailed in their entirety to members. The letter is there. We did get, members may recall, when Irene Knox of Libraries and I was up the last time, just prior, it was end of February, 26th of February, she actually gave members the hard copy of the Libraries NI Creativity Month, which I think prompted the discussion initially.
We booklet.
So I think we may have a few hard copies of that still in the office, but we will email the full coloured guide.
Don't be copying it anyway, because you're only wasting resources.
No, it was just going to be impossible to do.
I'll forward the email now.
Okay.
But we will forward it
Our
electronically.
members can tend to note that.
You'd rather buy the reservoir.
Correspondence then, decal investment strategy for March 2015 there is at page 99. And since the previous publication, the date for completion of Casement Park redevelopment has been amended to June 2018. Yes.
Great.
Also, this March edition includes the construction of Moira Library. Noting that.
What does that mean that it's in March? Because you're going to come to page, somebody help me, you're going to come to page 109, sorry, 106, in a minute, which is decals, outturn and forecast.
We're still on the previous slide. You're ahead of us.
Are we not talking about decals capital investment?
Moira Library.
Page 109 is after.
Yeah, it's going to be the same.
Page 99.
It's going to be, you're 99,
Yeah.
and I want to tie that up with page 106.
Okay.
Which is the forecast spend for March on capital is £12 million from third of the bills. So that's a big chunk to be paid in the last month of the financial year. So I'm just wondering if anybody can help me. Does that tie up with whatever they've said in that nice blue stuff?
I don't know.
There won't be, Moira Library won't be completed within that period. So in terms of the 27 million, a chunk of that is going to be ultimately having to be returned because we are not where we expected to be with either the casement construction. This was projected.
This is return the asterisks. I mean, I don't want to jump ahead, but this is. I just wanted to tie up. I'm happy, but the asterisks did show the easement of £6 million on the casement thing. So we have £12 million here to spend in the month of March.
Not a problem. I don't see that happening.
Do you understand? You Chair, that page that I'm at, page 106.
The capital that was set aside for casement, the question I suppose is what is happening to that? Is that the point?
No,
budget line returns.
Following the January monitoring return, we have been provided 3 pieces of paper, page 106, page 110 and page 111. And that shows period 9, period 10 and period 11.
We included 2 additionals. Normally we would get the period, but we've included the 2 previous periods for members to compare.
Which is useful. The question I'm asking is for the current one, which is page 106, the period 11, decal outturn and forecast outturn, and it's saying in here, forecast spend for March of the capital expenditure £12 million.
Right.
And I want to know, are we going to be returning £12 million, or what is that £12 million for? Because it's not the stadium.
received information. I did ask
We did
the
ask for
department some
supplementary
questions,
information on
but
this.
it's come in, and I'm not sure if my understanding of this is probably enough to go into detail.
If it is staff, Maria.
No,
if it
no,
is staff.
it was an email I've just received, so I'll maybe send it on to the member and let the member have a look at it. It breaks down into some of the questions that we have. I'll send it down to all members, but certainly if there's any more questions, we have contact now.
It may provide some answers. It is technical, and it could easily provoke more questions.
Well, you send it on, so
we let members have it, and I suspect we need to come back to questions coming out of that, because it is technical. And
Chair, there are only 13 periods, aren't there? There's a full 12 on the wash-up.
yes,
You haven't got the whole picture.
that's going
at
to
this point in
complicate
time.
things even further. What we're getting in these is the projections, and then you'll get a subsequent actual outturn. So the next one will be the actual outturn, which will indicate monies that have been returned.
Yes. All I'm saying is, if we're doing our job of financial oversight, we will be watching to see why our capital expenditure, Leslie might have thrown me a wee bit with having 13 periods, so that might explain it, but our capital expenditure after period 11 is forecast at 65%.
But the next correspondence from the department will clarify the money.
If we get sent what it is, and we'll look at it.
The capital one has just been problematic, particularly because of the stadia redevelopment.
Stadia's not covered now. No, it's just.
I'm aware of one organisation that received capital money at the end of the year to purchase a building which was previously rented.
Yep.
Now, I have no idea the amount of money involved.
That's the best to see it.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm not arguing with the thing at all. It's actually a good idea to do it, but I think that's something that came up suddenly and unexpectedly.
Slush fund. Use
Well,
up the budget.
Do you put capital money back, or do you actually spend it?
That's why Danny Kennedy worked.
Ever. No, it's not clearing slush off the roads anymore. This is nothing to do with the return of stadium. Like, we're better if we get that circulated. Yes.
It's financially complex, put it that way, but members can see what they get out of it.
Okay, we
when
can cope
come
with
back
it.
to
We can cope. Don't worry.
That's the spirit.
Yeah, we'll cope with it. We'll wait, Leslie. We'll work our way through it.
Okay.
Right.
Big letters, big numbers.
Fine.
So then down to
Right, never mind.
your page 9. Yeah.
Oh yes, right, I've got it now. Correspondence from Equity at page 112 regarding cuts in investment to professional theatre bodies. That was circulated probably to everybody.
Great.
If we
Sympathise with them, though.
you are sympathetic, so.
You've already discussed that, Leslie, didn't you? You raised it.
Well, we've already dealt with that in regard to the discussion that we had with the Arts Council earlier about the theatre companies. They've explained the situation and what they're doing, and you know.
It's on Chair, there'll be a answer
on
to that. We
record.
can refer it on.
The also saying their agreement to forward that correspondence to Arts Council and Screen for comment. In a sense, they have commented.
What might be more use now is if we let Equity have the transcripts of the Hansards, because they've already gone into this.
And then finally, the Forward Work Programme, page 115. Clark?
And counter fast, Chair, appropriately for International Dance Day, which is Tuesday the 28th of April. Members will remember committee agreed to host an event, Great Hall. As soon as the plenary suspends for lunch, the dancing will begin in the Great Hall, and then we are meeting the dancers afterwards for a bit of light lunch as well in the private dining room. So that's 28th of April. We also have a briefing coming from the dance people that will just lay out what exactly the dancing is all about, and we'll get that to members next week.
Can you just clarify? You said the 21st, then you said the 28th.
Sorry, 28th. That's 28th. Tuesday, the 28th, because that's the day before the official International Dance Day. It's the 29th.
Night relief from the reservoir bill.
Yes. Yes. This will be a distraction from the reservoir bill.
Much better than the.
We're on the 10 o'clock.
Chair, then couple of other things I wanted to highlight were the committee has agreed to meet at the Performing Arts and Technology Innovation Centre at the Bangor campus of the South Eastern Regional College on Thursday the 14th of May. Members will recall we had a briefing on the centre when we were looking at a performing arts coming out of the Creative Industries Inquiry. At that stage they just got the money, now it's there and it's a case of being able to see it. Then 28th of May, we're hoping, although it's still to be confirmed, that we will be able to meet at Kingspan. That's still dependent on the finishing of work at the Nevin Spence Centre. We'll also hopefully look at shared sports facilities with Aquinas School next door. They've developed a sharing of facilities there, and it's part of the idea of sharing facilities. So, Chair.
Any other business?
I have one query. I asked about the Creative Europe conference in London, I think on the 8th this month. I don't know if we ever got anybody to come back on it.
We did. Shauna's providing
She's providing us
information,
papers,
yeah.
and she hasn't done that. Okay, we'll follow that up with her. I thought that had already come in. Sorry, Chair.
There's no other items there. We've just got quickly, the next meeting of the committee is the 23rd of April at 10. At that meeting, NI Screen will brief the committee on the renewal of the BBC Charter. Also present will be the DCAL Permanent Secretary and Deputy Secretary. We need a closed session now to discuss